Hey everybody, my name's Dave Jackson and this is Tales from the Backlog, a video games podcast where I bring in guests to talk about the games we play. My guest today is a friend of the show, a co-host of the Pixel Project Radio podcast, and junior cryptozoologist, Rick Firestone. Hey Rick.
Hey Dave, it's good to be here.
Yeah man, good to have you. Today, Rick and I will be talking about Disco Elysium, which is a narrative-driven CRPG developed and published by Zaum. I'm guessing that's how you pronounce it. You know, I looked on YouTube for people saying this out loud, and it was very hard to find. So, Zaum. I'm going with that. Published in 2019, with an updated and expanded version subtitled The Final Cut releasing in 2021. And elevator pitch for Disco Elysium is a murder mystery where you play as the world's biggest fuck-up. Sound good to you, Rick?
That is perfect. That is exactly what I'm after.
Yeah. I mean, if someone pitched that to me in an elevator, I would have said, okay, sign me up. I'm tired of people who have their shit together. Give me the fuck up.
Or at the very least, you'd have me saying, no, come with me to my floor. Tell me more.
Yeah. But before we get into Disco Elysium, we always have a little chat about the other stuff we're playing. So other than Disco Elysium, what have you been playing lately, Rick?
That's a complicated question for me. I have a really bad habit of getting really excited about the prospect of a new idea, and this bleeds into my personal life too. Mm-hmm. And I flock to that, and sometimes that leaves too much on my plate, and then stuff just falls by the wayside. But all that to say, lately, I just finished up Superliminal, which I cannot recommend that game enough. It's flawless in my opinion. Just finished that up. Finishing up Yakuza Kiwami 2, as we've talked about a little bit before, Dave. Really excellent game. Started a little bit of a visual novel called Riddle Joker. And Fire Emblem Three Houses, of course.
Right.
That's actually been the bulk of my time lately.
Yeah. So let's talk about Yakuza. I'm kind of curious because I saw you played Like a Dragon, right?
Yeah, I did.
And then you're up to Yakuza Kiwami 2. So I'm guessing did you play Like a Dragon and then start the other ones, or kind of different order there?
No. So I actually started with 0.
Right.
I am a sucker for a good prequel, but I decided to start there because story-wise it makes sense, and everybody said that it was regarded as one of the best, if not the best, in the series. And then afterwards, Like a Dragon started becoming popular in the zeitgeist. Well, it kind of already was. And I was just super interested in it, so I started it. Got a little bit spoiled for some minor stuff in, I think, 3, 4, and 5, but overall... I don't regret it. It's different enough and phenomenal game. Really good JRPG.
Yeah, I just bought that. We're recording this a couple days after Thanksgiving, and I just bought that in the Black Friday sale, so I'm real excited to get to it sometime.
It's if there's one thing that I could levy against it, it might be not pacing issues, length issues in terms of cutscenes and just the entire game. It took me well over 80 hours to beat.
Yeah. Well, like, is it more cutscenes than the average Yakuza game? Because they're all super cutscene heavy.
It's certainly Kiwami 1 is my most recent, so that maybe isn't a great example. It's on par, if not longer cutscenes than 0. Okay,
that's a lot of you just have to be down for long cutscenes to play any Yakuza game. So if the JRPG gameplay is good, then I think I can handle that.
Oh, it's definitely good. The class system works much better than I was anticipating with, a beat 'em up transitioning to a JRPG. It's pretty intuitive, and it gives you enough to work with in terms of customization, so it doesn't really ever feel stale, I would say.
Yeah, it was not really a concern of mine. I kind of figured others, because I played all 7 of the Kiryu Yakuza games, and I was I mean, I would lie if I said I wouldn't play another beat 'em up style, like that might be lying, but I was getting a little bit tired of it because I actually don't think the combat in those games is that good. So the change was something I was kind of welcoming anyway.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, I obviously haven't played as many as you, but I like the beat 'em up. I like the JRPG. I was hesitant about it. I was also hesitant about the English voice acting, which I gotta say, it's very good. It's very
Cool.
good. But yeah, I do wish we had another Mark Hamill cameo like in the OG, but we got George Takei, so that's pretty cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like when I'm playing Yakuza games, I always play with Japanese, and I normally don't in Persona or like Final Fantasy. I always play with English voice acting, but it fits super super well because the Japanese voice acting is incredible in these games too. So I never really like kind of felt the need to go to English, but glad it's good.
Right there, yeah, right there with you. The Japanese voice acting is incredible. I don't think any of them, with the exception of the PS2 versions, have the option for English. But Seven
Right.
does, like a Dragon does. And I was gonna do the Japanese version, but I think they planned for it to be English voice acted. So I don't know.
Mm.
Either way, it's quite good.
Cool, cool. And you and I have been talking like throughout the weeks about Fire Emblem. So, um, how are you finding that game, like gameplay wise?
Anytime somebody asks me a question like that, like how do you find it, I say like, oh, it's right in my Switch. That's where I bought it.
Okay.
But
All right. Okay.
gameplay wise, it's my first Fire Emblem game, so the combination of the tactical combat with social sim elements is so up my alley. Plus,
Mhm.
it's maybe not super anime, but it's pretty anime.
It is.
So
Yeah.
all things that I really enjoy. The only tactical combat that I have experience with prior to this would be Divinity Original Sin 2.
Hmm.
And it's not as fleshed out as that system, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the way that Fire Emblem does it works quite well. I'm currently in my first playthrough. I'm going to play through it at least one more time. I'm actually doing one of there's 3 routes and 1 hidden route. So I'm actually doing the hidden route, which takes place in Edelgard's route, and that's about all I can say without spoiling anything.
Right. 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 Yeah. I've kind of like I don't know. Sometimes I think like the Fire Emblem combat is kind of been outpaced by some more recent like turn-based games because Fire Three Houses kind of shook up the Fire Emblem formula a little bit with getting rid of the weapon triangle, which I think is terrible. So I mean, it's good they got rid of it. The weapon triangle sucks, but it's still like you compared it to Divinity Original Sin 2, which I just think is an incredible turn-based system in comparison to Fire Emblem. But Fire Emblem is different. It's going for a different thing. I enjoyed it. I've played through the whole game twice, so I obviously enjoy it a little bit. And on New Game Plus cycles, the social sim part of it is like you can focus more. You don't have to worry about building up your professor level and doing that fucking god awful fishing mini game. So it's more of the good stuff when you get to New Game Plus. So you said you're planning on playing it again. I think you'll enjoy it maybe more the second time.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I don't dislike the grinding of the professor ranks. I think it makes for an interesting sort of resource management. But right there with you, that fishing game is dumb. I don't understand why fishing games are so fishing mini games are so popular.
Yeah.
So it'll be fine to not play that anymore. But yeah, I think I'm gonna go with Dimitri's route on my New Game Plus.
Yeah, that's a good one. And yeah, like grinding up the professor levels, the fishing one is free. It doesn't cost you any of your time resource. So that's why like you're kind of encouraged to just do a ton of fishing the first time. And then the second time, you don't have to worry about that. You get this resource at the end of the game that you can spend to buy your professor level back. And if you want, you can just max it out right at the beginning. So if you enjoy grinding it up without fishing, you can still do that if you want to. It's a really good New Game Plus kind of setup.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be interesting to get through. I still have, I want to say 7 chapters left, I think.
Okay, cool. Well, enjoy that, and I'm sure we'll keep talking about it. And then when you get to Dimitri's route, which is one that I've done, I'm sure we can talk about that because it's a good one. But for now, let's transition into Disco Elysium. So we always start with our histories with the game and kind of what brought us to Disco Elysium and kind of where did we play it, how long does it take to get through. I know lots of people are always curious about how long these games are. So guest always goes first. Rick, what interests you in playing Disco Elysium for the first time?
Yeah, so I got into PC gaming. That's primarily where I do most of my gaming now. In 2020 of January, really the perfect time to get into it. And I did so by buying a gaming laptop. Because up until then, all I had was like this old shitty laptop that could like maybe do Rocket League on the lowest possible settings and Skyrim, but that's about it. So I was looking through Steam for something to play, and Disco Elysium came up on my Discover queue. I had never heard about it before, so all I did was I Googled Disco Elysium reviews to see like how it was generally favored, and of course it was favored really well. So I went in blind and did not know what to expect for a lot of it, but there were 2 or 3 scenes that hooked me throughout to provoke me to keep going. And we could talk about that maybe as we go through the story. But yeah, I essentially came in blind. And what a serendipitous thing, because this game is far and away my favorite game of all time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely had that effect on a lot of people where, like, I was kind of the same way. This was one of the first games that I played on PC because I always, like, I have a terrible, budget laptop. And I had just always thought, like, oh, games that are PC only, guess I'm not going to play that. But if you remember, Disco Elysium put out this update. They called it the working class update, which lowered the system requirements like way, way down. Like, we're talking, I think they said like if you have a laptop made in the last 10 years, you can play Disco Elysium now. And so it even ran on my laptop, which is restricted to things from 2005 and before, basically. So, or like super indie games. So I was able to play it too. And I wanted to play it because it was on all of the like game of the year lists, basically. And there was people on Twitter basically like, you have to play this game. This game changed my life, stuff like that. Like, people that I know are not just saying that same thing about every game they play. So when that working class update came out, I went ahead and bought it, and the textures were super muddy, and the game hitched and froze all the time, and like, this is my computer's fault, not the game's fault. And like, I remember when I booted the game up, I had to like let my computer sit for like 10 minutes. Don't touch it. Just let it load the game, because if I touched it, it would freeze my entire system and I'd have to like hard reset it. So even through all those things, I was able to get through it. Really, really enjoyed it. I replayed it on Switch when it came out. The Final Cut version came out, and for anyone listening, it runs great on Switch. It crashed a few times, and the load times are pretty long. But if you play a lot of games on Switch, you're used to that. So, for playtimes, it took me 25 hours the first time, and the replay was 30 to 35 hours, and we'll talk about why that's longer on the replay a little bit later on. But yeah, how about you? You have your playtime?
You know, it's muddied in my Steam because I started it 1.5 times before I actually decided to finish it. But I think 25 to 30 for my first playthrough sounds about right.
Yeah.
Pretty comparable, if not a couple hours longer for the second playthrough.
Right. Yeah, that sounds about right. So, yeah. So we're going to get into kind of how the game works and the key mechanics and what makes this game stand out. And there are lots and lots of things that make this game stand out, in my opinion. So we're going to get started with the story and the characters. And we're not going to talk a whole lot about the story because this game basically is mostly story. The spoilers begin pretty soon after the game starts. So, just a little setup here. You play as a police officer, and your police officer, like I said earlier, is the world's biggest fuck-up. They have been on a drug and alcohol bender for so long and going so hard at it that when the game begins, your consciousness is kind of waking up from a primordial black void, and your systems begin talking to each other. Like, your character has been so far out of it that your body systems have to start communicating with each other again. So, yeah, that's the story setup. Do you remember, like, how did this story setup work for you playing as a, once you figured out that this is what this is about, like your character basically going through this so hard and also trying to solve a case?
Yeah. So I think how it worked for me was it was a tough putt at first, because playing a cop video game in 2019, 2020, 2021, that's it takes the care of very considered hands to make something like that work. And spoiler alert, it works quite well. It does. I don't have qualms about that. But when I realized that it was an amnesiac story, I was a little bit hesitant because, as you've pointed out, Dave, it's a trope that's familiar, right? We see amnesia used as a vehicle all the time for specifically something that I find to be heinous in games, info dumps. Like, what? You don't remember me, your brother that has been with you for this long, and we had this specific bonding event? Like, get out of here. Luckily, that this game doesn't do that. It handles the amnesia in, I think, ways that are more well considered and mature. Although there are, or I should say, there is a bit of proper noun soup, I think, is the word, the phrase that you use, Dave. Throughout the whole regaining your memories process. Yeah.
The amnesia thing works for me too. So basically your character has like the world's worst hangover and can't remember anything at the beginning. You can't remember that you're a police officer. Your character can't remember his name. You can't remember how your face looks. You go in the bathroom and the mirror is kind of fogged up and you don't even know what your own face looks like. So I think this does work better than a lot of the other kind of amnesia stories. It's an interesting like reason for the character to have amnesia. To the best of my knowledge, I've never played another game where you're an amnesiac because of your horrible hangover. So it works pretty well for me. Everything you're learning is super interesting. This is why people do amnesiac characters, to teach you about the world and stuff like that without telling your character something that they already know. When you're playing this game, your character doesn't know anything. So these are your dialogue options to ask about things that are as simple as money all the way up to like the politics in the game itself, or in the game world.
And it makes for an interesting role-playing element too, because you are quite literally in some aspects playing a blank slate. Like, yes, there are hard facts about who you were and how you got to where you currently are, but a big theme of this game is the notion of progressing from the weight of the past and those implications. So as a role-playing experience, it's handled great. There's so many different ways you can approach playing your main character, Raphael Ambrosius Cousteau. So many ways. You can be anything from a bleeding heart ultra liberal to a horrible racist fascist, and everything in between.
Yeah, and the game kind of supports you building the character the way you want. It supports you. Well, we said you've been on a long bender, and with that comes all kinds of horrible decisions and making life miserable for the people around you. So the game supports you going on a kind of redemption track. The game supports you doing drugs and drinking the whole time and being an asshole to everybody. It supports the way you want to continue this character's life, or turn it around if you want to. It supports all of that. At the beginning, your character, because of this like drug and alcohol bender, is in such a horrible state that this is just one thing I do want to tell people before you start. You can die at the beginning of the game in several different ways that are very funny. The one I think that's most famous is when you wake up, you have a necktie hanging from your ceiling fan, and you have to do a skill check to get the tie down. And if you fail the check, you can just straight up die from the exertion of trying to get a tie from a ceiling fan. So this is just kind of setting the stage for how like precarious your character's health situation is at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, that was my first in-game death, was turning on the lights and having a heart attack because I was so hungover.
Yeah, it's at the same I mean, it's frustrating if you die and you have to go back to the character creation screen. So if you're gonna play, like, save the game as soon as you wake up. That's a little advice for you. But it is hilarious that you can die by turning on the lights, or by reaching for your tie from the ceiling fan, or any of the other ways that you can die in this game. They're all usually really funny. So as you get the story started, and this is the last thing we're going to talk about before we cut story talk off for spoilers, you are joined by your partner, Lieutenant Kim Kitsuragi, and you two are tasked with solving the murder of a person whose body is hanging from a tree behind the hotel that you're staying in. And that's the story setup, but I do want to talk about Kim for a second before we get into spoiler time, because people listening need to know that, like, no hyperbole here, I think Kim Kitsuragi is one of the best video game, like, characters of all time, and certainly one of the best, like, companion characters of all time. He is just fantastic.
Yeah, he's a good boy. He is written so nuanced and so well, insofar as, he politically would be a centrist in that universe, and that's where the claws in this game come out. Really, they lampoon the centrists more than anything. But yeah, he's written in such a well considered and nuanced way that it's never they never outright go and attack his integrity or his character. It's more so he has lived a nuanced life, and that has shaped his worldview, and he wants to do his job. Like, he's there to do his job. He wants to do right by it and do right by you. And yeah, he's just a compassionate guy. I love Kim.
Yeah. He's So your character is a mess, to put it lightly, and Kim is the perfect kind of complement to that. Kim is very professional. He's very stoic. He comes off as very uptight at the beginning of the game, but as you go, you dig deeper and deeper into Kim, and you find out that there are things he gets excited about, and he is really funny when the time is right for it. And it's just, it's to the point where, like, if I ever talk to somebody who played Disco Elysium, they're like, I didn't care for Kim. I'm like, I don't know. I can't talk video games with you anymore. I can't talk about much. We can talk about sports, I guess. Yeah, he's the best.
Yeah, really, really good to have a foil character next to the mess that is. And good that it's Kim. He's got some of the most understated lines that make me laugh the hardest in the entire game.
Yeah, that sense of humor that he has is not like it's not the like laugh a minute that your player character's dialogue can be. It's much more like, you'll go hours and hours without Kim saying anything funny. He's very professional most of the time, and then he'll hit you with something and you're like, "Oh, Kim, you motherfucker, you got me."
Yeah, that's perfect. There is I think one of the first things that happened with Kim that made me laugh the hardest is when he asks, did you get the body down from the tree? And you can go through just a list of things like, yeah. And he just goes, so that means the body's not in the tree. And you're like, look, I don't like dead bodies. And then he's like, I don't either. But is this one in the tree? And eventually, you say, yes, it's in the tree. And he goes, so the body is in the tree. And then the little explanation is, it's clear that he preferred that it would not be in the tree.
I love it. So I wrote down a little list of the top 3 people that I least want to disappoint in my life, okay? So top of the list is my wife. Second on the list is my parents, combining 2 people into one. And then number 3 on the list is Kim Kitsuragi, and he bumped my brother off of the list. I played this game. Like we said, you can role play, you can be a giant asshole to everybody, you can do drugs and drink all the time if you want to, but Kim's going to be disappointed in you. And I can't disappoint Kim. And so, like, this is a good game for role-playing if you want to. But when I play role-playing games, I have a really hard time, like, being a dick. Unless it's, like, a game that's kind of built for that. Like, I don't know, the old Fable games, you could be an asshole to everybody. And it was very cartoonish and stuff like that. In this game, it was like, that sounds fun, but I really don't want to make Kim mad. I don't want to disappoint him. I want him to be proud of me, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get that body down from the tree.
Yeah, first of all, take that, Dave's brother.
Yeah.
Second of all, yeah, you're exactly right. Some games, and this is recency bias because I've been listening to a podcast, Watch Out for Fireballs, and they mentioned Fallout 3. There are games that handle morality in a kind of juvenile ways. Like in Fallout 3, you're either comic book hero good or twirling your mustache cartoon villain bad, right?
Yeah.
There's no middle ground. This game is much more nuanced, and oftentimes it comes down to, this isn't a good or an evil decision, but is it going to make Kim disappointed?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to weigh those sorts of things, like there's a quest involving cryptids, and Kim's not into that, but it's a good quest, and it yields good results. So, yeah, very nuanced.
Kim would definitely be disappointed in you for nuking Megaton in Fallout 3. Kim would not like that. So, one more thing on Kim, just real quick. The voice acting in the entire game is fantastic in the Final Cut version, but the voice acting for Kim, I think, is just perfect, because Kim talks more than anybody else in the game, and the voice acting is just incredible.
Yeah, I'm very relieved that they didn't try to voice because that would have involved entirely too much labor and or costs. But two, I just like a silent protagonist for role playing. But Kim is definitely one of the standouts to me. I don't know if you wanted to just toss in a couple of other standouts, but
sure.
The Titus Hardy, the replacement, I should say, in the final cut of Titus Hardy, very terrific. Everett Clare, very terrific.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of talking about the voice acting here. I'm a big fan of Egghead's voice acting. Egghead is very, very entertaining.
Skibba D, Skibba Danger. I am the rearranger.
Internally coherent. And I'm not going to say who this is, but at the end of the game, you meet somebody who just has incredible voice acting. And I had this as a point later in the notes, but we can just mention it now. The voice acting here has an emotion and a realness to it that most other games could never approach. After playing this Final Cut version of Disco Elysium, I'm really struggling to think of any other game that has voice acting at this level, consistently, with the amount of voice acting there is.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Dave, but I do feel like the voice actors in Disco are either really, really good or really kind of they got the job done. You know what I mean? There's nobody outright bad, I don't think. But there are a few characters that sort of just, they don't sound flat, but they sounded like they were afraid to raise their voice in times of emotion, or they were, afraid of crossing the limits that the microphone could handle in terms. I just wanted more out of some folks in emotional moments, but overall, I don't think anybody was downright bad.
Yeah, now that you mention it, there are some very intense moments in the story with different emotions behind that intensity, and the voice acting is never or not often matching the intensity of the scene, I guess. Yeah, you have a point there. But the quality of the voices themselves, and most of the time in the game, you're just in regular conversations. People are not screaming or anything like that. And those conversations are uniformly excellent. And since we're on the subject of voice acting, I do want to mention the narrator who narrates all of your skills. We'll talk about the skills later, but that's a big task for one person. And also narrates your interactions with objects around the world or just thoughts that you have. And this, I think I saw this guy took 8 months to record all of his voice lines. And I mean, his voice is great, but the acting in it is really, really good. All of your skills have little subtle differences in there. Not super different, maybe not as different as I would have liked, but I don't know if asking one person to do 25 distinct voices would be too much. So his name is Lenval Brown, and he voiced over 1.2 million words according to the lead writer for the game, and he did a fantastic job, the narrator.
Yeah, simply incredible.
So we kind of got sidetracked on the story, but we did set it up. We have our main character whose name we have been bleeping out because it's a spoiler. And then we have Kim, and you're set off to solve this mystery. So without any spoilers, Rick, what are your overall thoughts on the story itself?
What a loaded question. The one of the biggest, so this game shines in so many ways, and one of the things that makes it such an easy game for me to recommend to anybody is it has so much depth, but it lets you meet it where you choose to. So if you wanted to play this straight through just as a typical detective game, you can do that. You don't have to get involved with anything else. Right. If you choose to, you can explore the themes, namely things like politics, relationships, specifically those that maybe didn't turn out so well, and one of the biggest themes, the weight of the past. If you choose to, you can explore any or all of those, but you don't have to. And that's what makes this game such an easy recommend to me. Especially because if you just do the detective story, while I would recommend going for more, the detective story is good. Like, it's just a good story.
It's the detective story itself is not quite the Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes detective stories that, you may see in other media or other video games themselves. But it's an entertaining story, and you meet lots of characters, which I think are the real triumph of the kind of story itself. The characters that you meet are interesting across the board. We'll say that. Every character you meet is interesting. They have their own story to dig into. Even if it's just one conversation, you'll learn a lot about these characters. You're never going to meet someone who is just like, hey, I need a fishing pole. Go over and grab me a fishing pole, and then I'll tell you where your thing is. You're never going to meet someone like that. So those come together to kind of build up this detective story, which is pretty good, but we'll talk about it in the spoiler section. I don't think it's definitely not the best detective story, but overall this game's story, all the parts together, is one of the best game stories I've ever played. There's just so much, like you said, with the politics and with the other themes that you can explore. There's so much to dig into, and I'm glad that you said it's optional, because it is. Because when I play this game, I don't dig into the politics. That's just not something that really interests me that much. I am interested in how politics play into the story of this world, and they do that really well, but kind of the political commentary that this game does is not something that interests me, and that's not the game's fault. That's just my own personal interest. So this story, this game basically is all story. There's no combat or anything else that you're doing, so it has to be entertaining throughout, and I think it definitely achieves. There's going to be hilarious moments throughout it. There's going to be moments that make you tear up, and everything in between. So we finished talking about the story, and we should kind of transition into what makes that story entertaining all the way through, and that is talking about the writing. And writing is not something that I bring up very often on this show, because most games have very average, workmanlike writing, I'll say, or even bad writing in video games. But in Disco Elysium, the writing is, I think, the biggest strength of the game. Rick, what other video games would you say have good, excellent writing?
So we're looking at the sort of same note document, which, by the way, for those that don't know, Dave puts together very, very thorough and easy to follow notes for shows. So thank you, Dave.
Yay!
But we're looking at the same one, and the first two that came to my head were Planescape Torment and Witcher 3, which you have written down here. And I think that's a fantastic observation that you made too, Dave, insofar as there are games that have good writing, but it's really tough to say a game has excellent writing. I think as somebody that reads a fair amount, there is a divide between, standard game writing and literature. And I think Disco and Planescape specifically really do a great job of bridging that, if not crossing over. Witcher, that's kind of an interesting case because those are based on actual novels, but
Right.
it's, yeah, the writing is some of the most incredibly thorough. Thorough is not the right word. Some of the most incredibly nuanced and with so much depth that I cannot imagine it being described in any other way as like auspicious. It's just, you will have a good time reading this game.
Yeah.
Reading this game. You know what I mean?
And that's what you're doing. We haven't gotten into gameplay yet, but you are reading for 90+% of your playtime here. That is what this game is. It's talking to people and reading. And I totally agree. I'm not someone who really can tell like great prose from average prose. I'm not into, words. I tried to think of a better way to say that and I couldn't. I'm not into I don't get that deep when I read. It's usually either entertaining or it's like Final Fantasy writing or something like that, which gets the job done in Final Fantasy, but no one's going to say those games have amazing writing. Well, Disco Elysium is it is incredible. Like I said earlier, the characters are all so well described, even in one conversation. Even the minor characters, like I said, you're never going to talk to somebody that just says hey, sun's out today, and then that's the end of their dialogue. There's never anything like that. And so the descriptions of the things in the world, the descriptions of the emotions that your character's feeling, all the things that your skills say, even the kind of textbook noun soup that we talked about earlier, that's really well written, and most of it's in an entertaining way. And I just think that, I have talked to some people who are very much into literature, and they found this prose to be not very, not their style. And I understand that. But if you're comparing this to basically any other video game you've played, except for maybe, like we said, Planescape Torment and what The Witcher does, and I would throw the Fallout games in there too, for at least having entertaining and thought-provoking sometimes dialogue. This is standout. It's top of the mountain in my opinion, the writing.
And listening to you explain about the characters, Dave, kind of made me think one of the reasons that I think this game's writing and world building is so successful is because you get the sense that this game exists whether within you or without you, to go on to a Beatles tangent. I've been listening to a lot of Beatles lately, but this world exists whether or not you choose to interact with it. It doesn't exist for you, like you might find in some video games. Like Pokemon is a great example.
Right.
Every NPC feels like they're there to talk to. What have you stocked up on potions at the Pokemart before you take on your very first gym? There's none of that. This is a world that exists, and you get to be a pilot within it, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, 100%. You definitely, we'll talk about this later, but you definitely get the feeling this is not your story to save the world. Like you said, this world would have totally existed if your character had just died during that bender or never showed up in the first place. All of these characters would still be the exact same people. And it's just really, really good. And this game is really funny. And when when I hear people describe video games as funny, I cringe on the inside, because I know what that means for a lot of video games. Trying really hard, kind of putting too much internet humor into games is it's a huge turnoff for me. And this game is funny in a genuine way that real people are funny. We talked about how Kim will just he'll hit you with a joke and it's super unexpected, and you're and you actually laugh. I laughed playing this game, which by most accounts is not not a funny game at all, the things that are happening. But the dialogue can often be really, really funny.
It's funny because it has perspective, right? It's not just throwing out the memification of the internet, because that's Borderlands. That's how we get Borderlands.
Yeah, yeah. Borderlands is... I haven't played Borderlands, so it doesn't come up as an example, but now that you mention it, that's the kind of thing where I see a Borderlands clip and I'm like, ugh, no. Gross. Get that away from me. And Disco Elysium is just so real in the way that it's funny. One of the things that I think is really funny is Kim makes fun of you for running everywhere, which is what you do in video games. No one leisurely walks through the video games they play. And so Kim will just comment like once every 10 hours about, oh my God, are you done running now? Like, I'm so tired. And it's little things like that. It's not, fucking Claptrap or whatever the dude in Borderlands is. It's not that. It's little, very, very like mature humor most of the time.
Yeah, it really knows when to take shots at video game tropes. Dialogue trees is another one that I know the game really comments on, because that's what this game is dialogue trees.
Right. And in addition to being funny, actually, I think, games can be funny, but I think this is more important. I think the most important thing with the writing in this game is that Disco Elysium has a ton of heart. And there are various, very serious situations that you're dealing with, complex and emotional subjects, like, war and the after effects of war and poverty, tragedies that people go through, personal tragedies and drug addiction and alcoholism and depression and all of these things that most other games won't touch. Or if they do, a lot of indie games go for it, because a lot of indie games are very, very personal projects that people put out there. And so they want to talk about these things. But, your AAA space very rarely goes into these things, and Disco Elysium lives in those things. And I don't think there's any game that handles these things, these subjects, better than Disco Elysium does.
Couldn't agree more.
And so a good thing to mention is, because you are reading most of the time, Disco Elysium does not do the classic CRPG thing of putting all your text at the bottom of the screen. They kind of paid attention to social media, and they put it on the right side of the screen because they found that that's where people preferred to read it, and that it was more comfortable, and they turned it into this scrolling, almost Twitter feed of dialogue. And I really, really like this. I think it's much more comfortable than looking at the bottom of the screen like you would in Planescape Torment or the old Fallout games.
Yeah, and the lead creator and writer, or at least I believe he was the lead writer, Robert Kurvitz, he specifically cited Twitter as an influence, and he made the observation that, so many gamers will say there's too much reading, I don't want to read, but that's what we're doing all day when we're on these social media sites. I don't understand the aversion to reading in video games. I really don't. But I'm also a visual novel guy, so take that for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, I think that game developers can, give us some credit. If your writing is good, and if the things we're reading about are interesting, I will play Disco Elysium for 35 hours and read the entire time. If it's interesting, that's the main thing. If you're confident that what you're writing about is interesting and going to be fun to read, then I will do it. And I think that game developers have to give us some credit that, if a Final Fantasy game had this much text to read, or like you said, Pokemon earlier, if Pokemon had these huge dialogue trees about, talk to me about potions, talk to me about antidotes, talk to me about Paralyze Heal, that would suck. But Disco Elysium is interesting and all the things you're reading about are great. So, like, give us some credit. Video games are very interactive, and sure, we like combat and stuff like that, but it doesn't all have to be like that if the text is good. And one other thing to mention is that the voice acting we talked about earlier, the voice acting is very good and very well acted, and there's some emotion being told through the voice acting, but like we said earlier, that is one thing that is not perfect in the game. Sometimes the voice acting does not convey the emotion of the text, and it should be mentioned that this game did not always have full voice acting. That was put in the Final Cut update a couple years after release. So the emotion in the game is in the text, and it's something that you're reading. So, Rick, do you think that the text conveyed that emotion as well as it could have?
100%. Yeah, I think this game would work perfectly fine without voice acting. Period. That's the thing, right? Is it's so much. I mean, it's cheaper to put words to a page for one, so there's a practical standpoint of it, but also you can be so much more expressive and say more with text than you can by hiring Troy Baker to come in and voice act incredibly well, to be fair, whatever you're writing. So yeah, I started a third playthrough for this episode. I'm not doing any voiceover for it.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a good thing to mention that, like, I think the voice acting is excellent. I really enjoyed playing the game with full voice acting, but it 100% does not need voice acting in the same way that your favorite book does not need voice acting for you to enjoy it and get the intended emotions out of it. It's just excellent. So we're going to take a little break and listen to some Disco Elysium music, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the setting of the game, which is a very well realized setting. And we're back, and it's time to talk about the setting. So this game is set in the realist fantasy world of Elysium, Disco Elysium, and this kind of gets into my only real criticism of the game, is that if you wish to understand this setting and understand all of the things that go into making these characters the way that they are, there is a ton of proper nouns that you have to learn. And you have to remember what the names of these countries are. So Elysium is a world. It's made up of land masses known as isolas, and they're separated by this thing called the Pale. The Pale is a mysterious kind of connective tissue of the world, and it's kind of a mystery in the game what the Pale is until later in the game, so I'm actually going to hold off on saying what it is. But it's a very interesting concept, and you will meet people who have had lots of exposure to the Pale, and you will see what it kind of does to them. So it's this interesting world where the countries are very much separated from each other by something more dangerous than the oceans, we'll say. And so the nations in the game, and I didn't write the names of the nations down because, again, it's a lot of proper nouns. If you're interested, play the game. They will explain it to you. But it's interesting how the nations are kind of divided by ideologies. Well, not unlike our own real world. So the four main ideologies in the game are fascism, communism, moralism, and ultra-liberalism. And you will meet people from all of them throughout the game and kind of get a feel for what, I don't know, what they want in life or their beliefs. You can talk to them about all of these. Remember, your character is an amnesiac. He doesn't know anything. So you have free reign to ask everybody about everything. And you can learn as much as you want about these. An interesting thing about the game is that you can pick an ideology for your character as part of a mechanic we'll talk about later. Rick, which one did you go for?
So my first playthrough, which was pre-Final Cut, I went full leftist, unsurprisingly there. The second playthrough that I did Final Cut, I went out of my way to do the hustler, the ultra liberal, the gotta grind a clock, rise and grind, like that kind of. And what's interesting to me, Dave, I know you mentioned that the political story and the nuances within there are not completely your speed, right? But I think this game, and I keep saying this game has perspective, and I think I take a shot every time you hear me say that, folks, but it cannot be more emphasized than the political ideology. The game's creators are Estonian, and they are outspoken communists, which Estonia does not look favorably upon, as far as I know anyway. But that's not to say that the claws don't come out, as it were, with communism either. In fact, each of these moral ideologies, the four that Dave mentioned, they do get criticized in a real way. It's not criticizing them on paper. Fascism is bad. It is, but it's not just that simple. It's well considered. It's real because these folks have lived through these experiences, certainly more than I have living in the U.S. Right.
Yeah, and so like in my playthrough, I can't remember my first time. I actually might not have done one my first time because I'm not super interested in this kind of stuff. My second time, I did the communism track. I thought that was interesting because of the developers' like stated ideology. And this is not a game that's kind to communists. So like if you are kind of like, oh, this is a communist propaganda game, it is not. It definitely not. And so you can, and what's interesting is like when you do the communist thing, your character gets this idea that I feel like lots of young people have at some point where they're like, communism's the way to go. Like, let's do it. That sounds good. And then like you just get ground down and realize that no, communism's not this like perfect system that just hasn't been achieved in perfection yet. It's a really interesting and nuanced look at these ideologies. I would be interested to see what the fascism thing looks like, to just go full fascist and then see what the game does in response to that. But I'm not sure. So
yeah, I tried that a little bit on a playthrough before the Final Cut. It just wasn't for me. Like I just didn't really want to play that kind of character.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think, fair to say. But you're exactly right. It's I think when you complete the communism thought, you get a text. Well, you get a text box when you complete any thought. But the communism one, the biggest communism builder, you get text saying things like you feel like Krasmazov, who is that world's Karl Marx, has personally betrayed you, and things like you don't feel like the system has benefited you at all, but you feel like you have a university degree in truth.
Yeah.
From it. And it's like they are outspoken communists, the creators of the game, but they're not so narrow-sighted to not take shots at online leftists, which we see a lot of these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it would be very tempting as a writer, I think, to like put my own ideology in the game and portray it as the right ideology, and that is not what they do in this game. It's a very like zoomed out look at even their own ideology, and the other ones get skewered to it's just very good how they handle this. And so, like, especially with communism, you will meet other communists in the game and you will talk to them about it. And the conversations surrounding that are excellent. And I'm not going to go further for spoilers, but I just want to say those conversations are just A+, especially if you've been following the communism quest line. So, speaking of communism, the game takes place in the city of Revachol on the continent of Martinaise, and Revachol had gone through a communist revolution in recent history. This is the game world's history. And so the game world is set up in this, like I said, realist fantasy. These are fantasy places with fantasy concepts like the Pale, but there is a lot of our own world in this. And so they had this communist revolution, and then a capitalist group of nations invaded and overthrew the commune. And Rick mentioned before that one of the themes of the game is kind of like the weight of the past. And I don't think it's any more evident than it is when you talk to the NPCs in here and you see how Revachol is still feeling the scars of this revolution and this overthrow. And the city basically has no autonomy except for the police force. And that is the police force that your character works for. But because it's kind of it's called the RCM, and the M stands for militia. This is not like the government police or something like that. You don't have a ton of like outright authority here, and so it kind of gives this feeling like this country, the city, had their government overthrown. They really have no autonomy. Everyone has just been beaten down by what has happened here. I think in like this setting it's just very well realized. I really enjoyed it.
And it's interesting too, Dave, and you can cut. I don't think this is a spoiler, but you can cut it if it is. Mm-hmm. You learn later in the game that the RCM, the Revachol Citizens Militia, was a sort of outgrowth from these revolutionaries that tried to lead the failed communard, as it's called in the game, revolution. And that is a small reason why the RCM don't have a ton of power in Revachol, is that history is still there. So that feeds off of, like you said, the weight of the past and progressing forward with that. So it's another one of those things. You can ignore the politics as hard as you would like to, but it is pretty ingrained within the story.
It is. And when I say you can ignore the politics, like you can kind of ignore the history too, but what you can't ignore is like the emotional effects that all of this has had on the NPCs that you talk to. Like, aside from one person that we'll talk about in the spoiler section, no one is having a good time in this place, pretty much as a direct result of this revolution and then the invasion that came after that. So, like I said earlier, we talked about proper noun soup, and I do get lost in that sometimes when I play this game. And the only reason I'm as comfortable talking about this now as I am is because I played the game twice and then read on, wikis and watched YouTube videos about all of these details here. My first time through, I just kind of took in the flavor and the atmosphere of the world. And then, like I said, those emotions that the NPCs have, those are unmissable. So, I don't know, how's the setting work for you as a a backdrop for the events of the game?
I think it's terrific. It's it's this city that has undergone such a transformation, not in the way that they were hoping with that revolution. It's downtrodden. It is not a place of prosper. I think it works really well with the themes of the protagonist, the themes of the politics, the themes of Elysium. I struggled to think of a better setting but I'm also not super creative, so who knows?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting setting, and especially for there are a lot of fantasy games that go for this like realist fantasy, and you know this is not just like our world with dragons, you know, which that's basically like the Shadowrun setting, and the Shadowrun setting is fantastic, but this world definitely has a lot more kind of realism, and I would bet that it's based on, Estonian history and things that the developers grew up with, being an Eastern European country. Not to say that Estonia is this impoverished wasteland like, Revachol is turning into, but there's got to be some real world history that's bleeding into it.
Yeah, I'm not confident enough to speak on that, but I'm inclined to agree with you. It's got to be there.
Yeah. And it should be noted that there are the other countries in the game, or the other land masses, are based on real world places. However, I was not able to draw exact comparisons to those myself, so I can't speak on those, but I do know they made connections. Other people have made those connections before. Yeah. So we're going to take a little short break. We're going to listen to some more music, and when we come back, we'll talk about the gameplay. All right, and we're going to talk about the gameplay in this game, and the first kind of big thing to talk about is that this game, despite looking like, and I think being a CRPG, think Divinity Original Sin 2 or Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, things we've mentioned before, this game has no combat at all. There is not a combat system. Anything that you would think of as being combat in other games is all handled through dialogue. So, before I give my thoughts on this, Rick, when you're playing Disco Elysium, did you miss combat?
No, not at all. I'm not somebody that needs that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm totally fine with good writing and good world building.
Yeah. And I'm totally with you. I totally agree. And I'm not saying this to like disparage people who would like some combat, because that's how games work. You talk to people and then you kill some stuff and then you talk to some more people. That's how most games work. And I did not miss combat in this game. And in fact, the fact that I played this game for so long and did not ever wish, I wish there was a combat system. Not once did that thought cross my mind. That has changed the way that I look at other games. And I can think of some other games where the writing is excellent and the combat is horrible. And if I play those games now after playing Disco Elysium, I just think like, man, it would be nice to just get rid of this combat and do a Disco Elysium thing. And Planescape Torment is top of the list. I think the combat in Planescape is horrible. But I love talking to people in that game and reading. And if I could just do it all in like dialogue boss battles, that would be fantastic.
Another example, I think Planescape's the best example, but another example that I think of a lot is Tales of Berseria, which is a game that I put it down recently. I love everything about it, but playing the actual game with the combat sucks so much. And,
yeah.
I think that if they would have put a combat mechanic in Disco, it would have just been awkward. But you get to shoot a gun. You get to do a dragon kick at one point, but it's just like it's Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's a dice roll, and that's fine. Those mechanics are crunchy enough to me that I'm cool with it.
Exactly. Another game I'm thinking of that has entertaining writing and bad combat are the first two Fallout games, and just my opinion, it's turn-based, so it's better than Planescape Torment, but it's one of the worst turn-based systems I've ever played. I would rather it just not be there.
Hasn't aged well.
No. So, yeah, that's the point. Like, Disco Elysium is going to have a lasting impact on people who make games. And so I hope that they take some things from this game, like I love the skill system. I hope people take that. But the thing that I most hope that games take from this is even if you're making a game that traditionally has combat, you don't have to if the rest of the game can carry the weight. And people will love it. Your game will win Game of the Year even without any combat. And I really hope that's like a big part of this game's legacy, because, you know, after playing this game, like I said, I played Planescape Torment right after I played this for the first time, and my whole time I was like, oh God, can't I just do this in dialogue? Why do I have to fight these people?
You know, it's like music in a way. My background is in music, for better or for worse. But you know, if I'm listening to a string quartet by some new composer like Caroline Shaw, it's always a question of, does adding something, is it in service of the piece? I could add all the fast runs that I want, or I could play all of the cool licks that I want, but is it in service of the piece? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Disco Elysium, another perfect example. Is combat additive? Does it serve the work? No, not at all. There are other things that serve it better.
If this game had a C+ combat system, it would have made the game worse. And I applaud the developers for, I assume they at some point like thought, yeah, we'll have gun combat or something like that. I assume that was part of the process, and at some point they decided, nope, cut it out. And I applaud them for that. So, since there is no combat, most of the time you are playing, you're either walking around kind of looking for stuff or in dialogue, most of the time in dialogue. And we mentioned the dialogue trees, but I do want to mention that this is a dialogue tree system where, like, you have a lot of options, but sometimes you can't use all of them. And so sometimes you have to pick, what would your character say? And then you can't go back, really. Or you shouldn't, you can, like, leave the conversation and come back and open the dialogue again and try to get back to that point in the tree. But I did that a few times. It never felt great. I don't recommend doing that. So you're going through the dialogue, and oftentimes your skills will pop in. We'll talk about them later, but you have 24 skills to choose from. And your skills will pop in throughout the dialogue. They're constantly running skill checks in the background. And if they succeed, they'll pop in with their observations, their musings, their advice. Your skills are different aspects of your personality or your body. I guess I would say they're all aspects of your personality. And so you're talking to the people, but your different parts of your brain are also chiming in all the time. And sometimes they're reliable, sometimes they are not reliable, sometimes they'll be very helpful, and they'll be like, hey, press this person on this issue. And sometimes they'll say that and it's not helpful. And I really like how this kind of simulates like being scatterbrained, or at least kind of shows you how different parts of your personality will influence the way you handle a conversation. And this is what you're doing basically the whole game. Talking, interacting with your skills, and sometimes doing skill checks. So, Rick, how do you feel about this dialogue system with the skills popping in and the skill tree based dialogue?
I mean, I love it. I'm not opposed to skill trees at all. I think any criticism of dialogue trees is what I meant to say. I think any criticism of dialogue trees is actually doled out within the game. So the skills, I like the skills a lot. And listening to you talk about how sometimes the skills maybe aren't so helpful. One of my favorite things about this game is that's a delicious little trick that they hide from you for a while before they show their full hand, is that the skills aren't presented as being infallible, but they are presented as being well considered and aware of everything, etc., etc. And one of my favorite scenes in the game that I won't spoil is when your skills have this realization: we've been played, we've been had, we've been giving you bad information. And it's such an impactful moment that it's like, who can I trust if I can't trust myself? You know?
Right. And sometimes, like, your skill will say, hey, do this, do it, dude. And you're like, okay, yeah, I trust you. You're me. Why would I not trust you? And then something bad happens and your skill will actually say to you, like, oh, dude, why did you trust me? You shouldn't trust me. That's a horrible idea. It's really good. And sometimes your skills will pop in with, like, more fleshed out thoughts, like actually entire conversations that you have with your skills. And a couple of my favorites that do this are Shivers, which is kind of your supernatural connection to the city. And like, well, Shivers, it's easier to imagine if you're outside, you get a shiver, and suddenly you notice everything that's happening around you just for a split second. And that's what this skill is. It's like Shivers will chime in and it will tell you about something that's happening down the street or something like that, or even across the ocean or something like that. It's these quick little moments. And these will give you very, very interesting, like, dialogues with that skill. Sometimes it's helpful for the game itself. Most of the time it's just flavor text, but it's excellent flavor text. Another one that I really like is Perception. You'll just hear something and the game will describe to you what you hear or what you see, and it's really, really interesting how they'll just pop in. The way that you'll be walking down the street and you'll notice something and you'll have a little inner dialogue about it, and then it's gone.
Another one that I liked quite a bit is Inland Empire.
Yes, yeah.
Appropriately named, I think, after a David Lynch film. It sits at this cross section of your imagination and this Lynchian supernatural things are not what they seem sort of affect, and it's always entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're going to talk about these skills a little bit later when we talk about how to build your character and kind of the RPG side of this game. But yeah, those three, Shivers, Perception, Inland Empire, are often creating dialogues just by themselves, even when you're just walking down the street or something like that. And it's very good. One other thing about the gameplay to mention is that this game runs on a clock, and people have their own schedules, and time passes as you're playing the game. But it's kind of interesting because this is not a real clock like Animal Crossing or something. This is an in-game clock that only passes when you're in dialogue. So you can run around on the street for 2 hours of real time, and time will not pass in the game unless you talk to something or interact with something. So the way this plays in is that NPCs have schedules, and some of your quests are only accessible at certain times. A lot of times that means you'll get a quest that says, like, hey, this person's going to be here after 10 p.m. Come back after 10. And we talked about Kim. Kim will go to sleep or want to go to sleep later in the game. And so sometimes you'll have a late night thing you want to do, and you need to let Kim go to sleep and then go out by yourself so you can do something shady behind his back, which I would never do because I don't want to disappoint my buddy. But yeah, this time system is pretty interesting. You can pass time by reading a book, and that's the main way to pass time, which led to a very funny situation for me. It was 3 p.m. on a day later in the story, so I had cleared out most of my side quests, and I needed to wait until 10 for the only remaining thing. So I had a book about cockatoos, and I read the book about 25 times for 7 game hours until it was 10 p.m. And, you know, people like to talk about diegetic storytelling in games. Well, I love the idea of my kind of like reverted to childhood character with Kim next to me on the street, and I'm just reading a book about cockatoos for 7 hours, and Kim is just patiently waiting until I'm done with my little thing. It was really funny. Did the time system ever give you any trouble, Rick?
Not really. I was never feeling confined by the time limit or the getting the rent for the hostel by 2 a.m.
Right.
It was never a big deal for me.
Okay, yeah, same here. Other than that thing where I kind of ran out of stuff to do and I needed to pass time, so I read my cockatoos book 25 times in a row. Other than that, it was not really an issue. And it does kind of help you prioritize, because you're going to get a big list of side quests, and then if you have some that are only available at certain times, then you just, okay, I'll do those later. Let me take care of this other stuff. There's a time limit in the game. The game runs on a clock, and you go day by day in the game time. And from what I can tell, the time limit is day 10, from what I read. However, I want to caution anyone, or give some advice to anyone listening who hasn't played the game and is thinking about it. Do not stress about running out of time. I find it very, very, very hard to believe that you will ever run out of time unless you read the Cockatoos book, 8 hours every day. I don't think it's really possible to run out of time. Both times I played the game, I beat it on day 6 without rushing. I did all my side quests, or at least the ones that I could. So I can't really comment on what happens at the end of day 10. I imagine something bad happens, but I have no idea. The point is, don't rush. You'll be fine. You will make it through the game with plenty of time to spare.
Even if you're failing checks and stuff like that, failing forward is a key verb of this game. So you would be hard pressed to run out of days without intentionally doing so. Yeah.
It's a cool, I guess it's a good idea, because there are things happening in the story that are time sensitive and would be time sensitive if you were in that situation, And so it is kind of smart of the game to have that timer going and let you know, hey man, you can't fuck around. And it gives you that kind of sense of I should get my stuff done. But in reality, you can fuck around. You'll still get your stuff done. You will not run out of time.
Yeah, that made me think of everybody's favorite buzz phrase, ludonarrative dissonance, which right. in this game, there's not that much of it. It's not, it's not like The Witcher 3, where the Wild Hunt is closing in on Ciri, so we're going to go play Gwent with everybody within a 2-mile radius.
Right. Yeah, in this game, there are things that are very, very important, but most of the time, what you're doing is in support of solving this case. So you're not playing Gwent for 20 hours throughout the course of a Witcher playthrough like I did. You are mostly taking care of business, and you take on some side tasks, like we talked about cryptozoology earlier. And you can take that on. That's fine. And Kim will kind of, if you're doing those things, Kim will kind of say, hey man, this doesn't really connect to our case. And but you can still do it, of course. And you should do the cryptozoology side quest. It's great. So let's talk about kind of what makes this game an RPG. We talked about story and setting and things like that. And so there are a couple of very interesting RPG mechanics in this game. So, as a CRPG, you are dealing with dice rolls that kind of control whether you succeed or fail in the things that you're trying to do. So, Rick, before we get into it, what's your experience with CRPGs or even tabletop?
Prior to Disco Elysium, donut hole, absolutely zero. I have always wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons, but have struggled to find other friends of mine that do. And I didn't play Divinity until after, what is this game we're talking about? Disco. I didn't play that until after Disco Elysium. So this was my introduction.
Okay, cool. So as someone who didn't have any experience with that, did you find any of these things difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. And that's specifically for me because I'm not the kind of gamer American that needs like tappa constant like combat. I am more than okay with my games being passive. So this, and I'm not like being disparaging by calling people out that like Call of Duty, but it's, that's just not the speed that my brain runs at. And so this was a really natural transition for me out of like, Final Fantasy turn-based combat.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I had played both of the Divinity Original Sin games before I played this game, and I've played a couple sessions of D&D, and I've played some other tabletop games like Fate a lot more. And so I'm familiar with the idea of skill checks and things like that, but for anyone who's playing this new and doesn't have any experience like Rick, I think this is pretty simple. They don't really overwhelm you with a lot of stuff like, this game is way less complicated than D&D. D&D is real complicated sometimes, and especially older versions of D&D, if you play like Baldur's Gate or Planescape Torment, this is way less complicated, a lot more intuitive. So it's pretty easy to get. And so you earn experience in this game because there's no combat, which is how you usually get experience in video games. You get experience for completing your quests. And so you get 70 XP for a main task. You get, I think is it 30 XP for a side task, or is it 10?
I think it's both, depending on the task.
Okay, right. Depending on how big it is or something like that. And then sometimes you'll get 5 to 10 XP for a thought you have, or passing a random skill check or something like that. And so that's how you get XP through dialogue, just like the rest of the game. And one thing to note is that it is always 100 XP between levels. And so there's none of this, level up real fast at the beginning of the game and then you need 30,000 XP to level up at the end. It's always 100. I think that's really good. When you level up, you get a skill point, which you can use to put into any of your 24 skills. But I'll say this right now and we'll get into it a little bit later. Why? Don't spend your skill points right away. Other games have kind of trained us to get a skill point, spend it immediately because you're going to need it, in combat or something like that. Don't do it, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the dice checks. So, in the game, you have 4 main governing abilities: physique, motorics, intellect, and psyche. Psyche. Yes. And within those abilities, you have 6 skills for a total of 24 skills. And this is basically can be broken down into mental, 2 mental abilities, intellect and psyche, and 2 physical abilities, physique and motorics. And this is where you're going to spend your skill points. Rick, what kind of characters did you run when you played through Disco Elysium?
So the first character that I made, and I suspect this is where most people will fall too, is putting a lot of points into psyche to create this emotionally unstable yet hyper aware kind of cop. The second playthrough, I actually did a balance of intellect and psyche, maybe preferring intellect a bit more. And it's striking how different the game plays out. Like, nothing fundamentally changes, but you get a lot more. It's more, I don't want to say by the books, but it's more as you'd expect a crime drama to go. And in terms of you being the investigator, you get more background on the city and the history, which, again, like you've mentioned, Dave, proper noun soup, but still very interesting. The only one that I haven't done has been like a big lughead going around punching to solve the case.
Yeah. So my first playthrough, I did all mental stats, no physical stats, and that was interesting. I didn't get the proper noun soup because I never pump up encyclopedia, which is your kind of skill of both useless and useful trivia or history. So my first playthrough, was very based in Inland Empire. I think was like my main skill my first time. Inland Empire and like rhetoric and logic, I think, stuff like that. But my second playthrough, like you said, because I think a lot of people do play this game as mental and emotional stats first. That is kind of the tone that this game has. I played a physical character on my Final Cut replay. And so it was really based in hand-eye coordination and perception and reaction speed and what physical instrument is just the, like, you know, your skill that says you're a brick shit house, basically. So that was my second playthrough, and I put a few points into my favorite mental skills as well, because I feel like there are a lot more checks that you need to pass that are based on those mental things. Oh, my second playthrough, I pumped up shivers. My shivers was like 11 when I finished the game. So,
how did that change the game for you, Dave? Like doing a physical based playthrough?
So like you said, it doesn't change the plot really at all. It does make some things in certain situations easier. There are situations that they give you where a more mental based character will excel and a physical character will have a hard time. And then there are situations where, like, I don't need to do this workaround because I can just bash this door down with my shoulder. And so there were a lot of situations like that. And there's a couple I'm thinking of later in the game where being very physical was super helpful. I can't say them now for spoilers, of course, but, like, I do think this game is kind of meant to be played your first time as this, like, emotional creature, you know? But it's definitely still really interesting and really entertaining playing it physical. There's a character in the beginning of the game, and I'll just give this example. It's in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler. There's this big character named Measurehead in the beginning of the game who is blocking your entrance to this area you need to go into. And so you can use some mental skills to kind of trick him into thinking you're part of his ideology. Or you can just do a jumping spin kick and kick him in the throat and basically fuck up his life forever if you're a physical character. So, like, the physical things are a lot more direct, I would say. The solutions to problems going in a physical way. But the mental things, I think they're more entertaining, and I would recommend people play as a mental-based character the first time. Emotional and rhetoric and drama, those are all very entertaining things. But it was nice to be like, I don't have to do this runaround to get into this back room when I can just shoulder bash the door down. It was kind of nice.
And really, if there's a takeaway from the game, I think it's that. I think it is that you should do a running jump kick for all of your problems in life.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if you fail that skill check, it's very funny too. Actually, we'll talk about that now. Failing skill checks is something that this game does really, really well. When you play an RPG, when you play tabletop, when you play Divinity Original Sin, you don't want to fail your skill checks, right? that's failure. You die, or you're convincing them not to kill the prisoners, and then you fail your skill check and they kill the prisoners, or something like that, right? Well, in Disco Elysium, and Rick, this is probably bad for you because this is the first one you played, but in Disco Elysium, it's pretty unique how when you fail your skill check, the game moves on. It's very entertaining, and most of the time you can retry that skill check later. This is one of the other things that I hope other CRPGs take, that failing skill checks is often good and entertaining, and you should not save scum most of the time.
Not only is it good and entertaining, but it's realistic too, because like, there's no lockpicking in this game as far as I'm aware, but there's thinking of an inane one. There's a skill check that you can try to lift up, to do a deadlift with a barbell, and you can fail it, but you can also retry it once you put more points into that. Right. So that's akin to saying like you went and, exercised for a week and then came back and tried again. It just makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And so the way that works is it's broken up into two colors of skill checks. There's the white ones, which you can attempt as many times as you want, as long as, like Rick said, you put a skill point into whatever skill that you're checking. So the deadlift, I don't remember exactly, but I think it's a physical instrument check. If you fail it, put a skill point into physical instrument and try again. It's as simple as that. And that's why I think you should walk around with skill points available instead of spending them right away, because you're not sure exactly what you're going to need them for. So later in the game, like in my replay, I noticed, I was like, oh shit, I have 8 skill points right now. I should probably go retry some checks and use these, because level ups come pretty frequently as you're solving quests. And the other type of skill checks are red checks, which you can only try once because they're often very serious situations, or like you're taking this conversation down a road that you realistically would not be able to retry again, So, 2 different kinds of skill checks. And Rick, did you save scum any of the red ones?
There is one that I refuse. Well, that's not true. There are technically 2, but there is one that I outright refuse to fail. I don't know if I want to, because it's not a spoiler per se, but I'll say this. There is a part in the game where you can ask Kim to dance with you.
Yeah.
And it is terrific. It's so good.
It is.
But if you fail it, you get caught up in the heat of the moment and you call him a slur, and that's not good.
No, not great.
I don't want. That's the only one that I ever saved scum before. I didn't even have to because I passed the check, but I was prepared to.
Yeah, I saved scummed a few, and so I wasn't meaning to call you out. Like, hey Rick, you fucking dirty cheater. How many did you save scum? I saved scummed some. It's just a gamer habit, and even if you fail those red checks, the game doesn't stop. Sometimes you'll get a game over and you'll die because you are attempting something that could lead to your death, or your character's in a very tenuous health situation, so maybe you die. But I save scummed a few. It's not necessary, and if you're very good at just rolling with what the game gives you, then there's no need to save scum anything. You can get through the whole time. You can fail your way forward through the game and you'll still, probably still finish the game. I can't imagine there's a scenario where the game locks you out of the ending because you failed too many checks.
No, there's one check towards the end of the game that you can just miss out on some content, but it's not detrimental to the case. And I think the game communicates this very well from the beginning. In the very beginning, you wake up and talk to this woman, and you have a skill, you have a check to flirt with her. And, if you succeed the check, which is, I think, harder than it is to fail it, she just says oh, you're a very sad old man. I can smell the alcohol on you. But if you fail it, you blurt out the phrase, "I want to have fuck with you," and she just makes fun of you.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect way to introduce the player to this notion that failing is not only fine, but paramount to enjoying this experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I said before, but even if you do fail a check and you are low on health, so you die or something like that, the death screen, it gives you like a newspaper clipping that says like what happened to you. It's always entertaining. So like, even if you die, I think it's still enjoyable. It's just a very enjoyable system. And this is another thing that I hope RPG developers, if you have skill checks in your game, please, for the love of God, make it so that failing checks is not an automatic quick load, you know. Make it entertaining, make it interesting. This is what, when you're playing tabletop, if you fail a skill check and you have a good game master will make that entertaining and make it, you know, worth your while to try that skill check. And even if you fail, it's going to be fun. And Disco Elysium really nails that. So, we had just talked about how you can die, so I should mention the health system in Disco Elysium. You have two kinds of health, your mental health and your physical health, called morale and health. I think set that one up really well. So, like, for example, if you take a big L in a dialogue battle, you might lose some morale. If a little kid makes fun of you, and it hits deep, which does happen in the game, you'll lose some morale. And if you fail a physical-based check, like I talked about shoulder checking a door, you can fail that check and you will just smash into the door and hurt yourself and not open it. And so those will damage you. And if you run out of either of those, you die. That's how you can die from getting your necktie down from the ceiling fan at the beginning of the game. Because if you built a character that is not physical based and then you suffer physical damage at the beginning, you just die right at the beginning. But you can restore these pretty easily. You can buy drugs or you can find them around the place, not like, you know, morphine to recover your physical health. It's more like, you know, finding Tylenol or something like that. So it's really like, and those drugs are not expensive, so it's really not hard to stay up on your health systems. So, how did you like this kind of the way that you take damage through skill checks, Rick?
It gave it a sense of gravity. It made it seem like that it mattered beyond just pass or fail. And, you know, it's realistic. If you shoulder check a door, that's going to hurt you.
Yeah.
One thing that I appreciated was that it's a rolling based system, sort of like Earthbound, insofar as if you have 1 health and you get hurt for 1 health, it's going to go down, but it gives you a second to click on the restorative item that you have. So minus 1 health to a total of 1 health isn't an automatic game over. Unless you don't have, you know, whatever it is that restores your health. I can't think of it right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. Like the game is trying to tell you, like, hey, you took damage here, but I think these developers want you to maybe die a few times throughout the course of the game in some entertaining ways, but this is not a punishing game. And that I think that system kind of exemplifies that, where, like you said, if you take damage that would take you down to 0, you have a couple seconds to just hit that quick heal button and you'll be fine. So, yeah, I like how this system, I especially like the moral damage that you take. Like, you try something in a conversation, you try like a line of persuasion and you fuck it up terribly, like you miss the skill check, and like, it's real. You would take some kind of like hit to you, at least your confidence or something like that. So failing the physical checks and losing health was like, yes, of course that would happen. Of course. I tried to bash this door and I hurt my shoulder. Of course. But the moral ones are very funny. I really enjoyed every time it's like, ooh, -1 morale. I was like, yeah, yeah, they got me, or yeah, I fucked that up. It's good. There's one skill check I'm remembering where your character wants to make this like heroic leap to go grab their coat from a railing, and if you fail the check, you don't like just leap off the building and miss and die. You'll get right up to the edge and then you'll stop, and you take morale damage because you're like, ah, damn it, I'm a coward. Not gonna make that jump. And the last kind of like big mechanic to talk about is the thought catalog, or the thought cabinet. Yeah. The last kind of mechanic to talk about is the thought cabinet, which is the other big innovation for the game. And so we talked about this with the political ideologies, but there are so many other thoughts that you can get. So as you're going through the game, you will kind of get ideas, either from looking at stuff or talking to people or stuff like that. And you'll get this notification that you just learned a new thought. And you have a separate screen next to your skills where you can assign thoughts into these empty slots. And then you have to it'll say your character is like internalizing these thoughts, but what it really is like you're kind of rolling this idea around your head as you're going through. And while that's happening, it has like a time. This thought takes 10 hours to internalize. So while that's happening, you will get a temporary buff or debuff as you figure out the idea. So for example, there's a thought called rigorous self-critique, where your character is just always criticizing themselves. So while you're researching that thought, or while you're internalizing it, you have a -1 to your authority skill. And like when you do internalize it, that temporary buff goes away, and you get a new permanent buff as long as that thought is equipped, basically. So, Rick, the thought cabinet is something that I think is super unique to Disco Elysium. How do you think it works?
You know, it's fine. It's certainly not my favorite thing that they choose to do mechanic wise. I think it's nice to have certain buffs and debuffs because of role playing, and we should say it's also a point where they get to flex their prose chops because each thought comes with and I apologize if you were if you had mentioned this already, Dave. My cat, listeners, is going a little bonkers in the background. I was trying to make sure that she's not getting hurt, but so apologies if you explain this. But each thought comes with a problem and a solution, wherein it describes sort of what you're talking about. So I think those were probably my favorite part of the thought cabinet. Especially there are some good ones like Inexplicable Feminist Agenda is a good one. The Homosexual Underground is a very good one. And then there are some that, are a little more somber, like A Long Way From Home or Apricot Scented Chewing Gum.
Yeah. The prose in those thought cabinet things is very good. It's always worth reading those, especially when you unlock it and you get like the longer version of it. It's always worth reading. Should also say that these thoughts have their own portraits drawn, and the art is just incredible for these. They are horrifying and interesting, every last one of them. It makes me like, so during the game you'll only have space to learn about 15 of these. I don't remember exactly how many slots you have, but it's not, you can't learn all the thoughts that you find. And it was truly a pleasure unlocking those, reading the long kind of explanation of what your character has learned or internalized, but also seeing that portrait that they drew. And all the skills have portraits too that are just incredible. I think my Steam icon right now is the Shivers portrait, because if you're listening to this and you're not going to play Disco Elysium, just go on like the wiki and look at these portraits for the Thought Cabinet, because they're really good. In my opinion, with the Thought Cabinet itself, like mechanically, I don't like how unpredictable it is, which like that's the way they made it. So like you're not really sure what a thought is going to give you until it's internalized. And so like you could spend some time internalizing a thought. It turns out you get a horrible debuff to something that is one of your key skills, and you don't want it to have a debuff. And so you can forget those thoughts, but it costs you a skill check or a skill point to forget them. So I ended up forgetting a couple because I didn't like the debuff. I ended up forgetting a couple because I don't like the content of the thought itself. And I don't, like, kind of in a role-playing sense, I'm like, I don't want my character to have this as a part of their, their personality. There's one that's like basically like becoming a critical race theorist. And I'm kind of like, I don't really want that to be a part of my character. So I forgot that. I do like how this kind of just models how different thoughts that you come across in life, and you roll them around for a while, and sometimes you really take them to heart, and that becomes a part of who you are, I guess. These ideologies or these thoughts or these memories, even some of these are memories. And I don't know, a lot of these thoughts deal with content that is very heavy or very unsavory, and I like the way that they're written. I don't think most games could handle this in an intelligent way. So I like the Thought Cabinet as like a character building thing, but it's more the character building in my head than the like mechanical character building.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better myself. Yeah,
so like you'll go through, you'll get these thoughts, and I often just picked ones that had interesting titles, or like if I knew the subject, like I know this is the thought about communism and I want to follow the communism quest line, then I'll internalize this one. But most of the time I just picked ones that sounded interesting. And yeah, sometimes the buffs, they're not just like straight +1 authority. Sometimes they'll give you other effects too, I should say, like the rigorous self-critique one heals you when you fail a red skill check. So that's its buff, along with maybe a stat buff as well. But so like they're not all just like, dealing with your stats. There are other effects that some of these thoughts have too, which are good. And they'll give you new dialogue options too if you have certain thoughts internalized and like locked into your Thought Cabinet. So did you end up like maxing out your Thought Cabinet, or was it something that you did sometimes and kind of ignored sometimes?
No, I ended up maxing it out just because, like you had mentioned earlier in the episode, at a certain point you have an abundance of levels. And after a certain point, I was comfortable in my character build that I didn't want to sort of save my points for a rainy day in the case of a failed check. So I just decided to, open up more cabinets. So
fair enough. Okay, let's kind of wrap up this spoiler section before giving our final thoughts. We already talked about the voice acting, but I do want to say again, I think the voice acting is fantastic. Across the board, the voices and like the people that they found to do these voices they didn't find, let's find all of these people that have extremely pleasant voices to listen to. They found people that sound like more real people. There are, there are old people in here. There are people with really grating voices that are super fucking annoying to listen to, and they did that on purpose. And so I think there was and there are people with lots of different accents too. That's my other thing about the voice acting that I think is really great. This is not all people with British accents, which is something that a lot of games fall into. There is a wide array of accents here that is very, very interesting. They kind of describe Revachol as like the place where all of the garbage from the rest of the world is swept to and collects here. So it makes sense that we have a lot of different accents and things like that. So I think the voice acting was very well casted. And on the other side of sound is the soundtrack. So Rick, you're a music guy. What do you think about the soundtrack?
It is one of my favorites in recent memory. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, I'm just a big fan of atmospheric soundtracks, but two, this soundtrack was wholly recorded by a band called British Sea Power. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say they recorded specifically for this. They took existing songs of theirs and sort of reworked them to be for the game. Now, the band itself, though, phenomenal. And the theme that is prevalent in the main streets of Revachol is taken from a song of theirs called Red Rock Riviera. And it is so powerful to hear the full version. I just cannot gush about this soundtrack enough. It is, and in fact, Dave, my favorite sound, not track, but my favorite, point of music in the game is when you are traversing for the first time over the canal lock into sort of the fissure area.
Yeah,
and it's so desolate and it's so sparse, but it makes such good use of timbre and space, and I get chills thinking about it. It's so good. Go listen to British Sea Power, everybody.
Yeah, I have listened to some after hearing it. I mean, dude, it is frankly amazing to me that they took existing music, took out the vocals, reworked some of the songs, and made it fit this game and the emotion and like the tone and the mood of this game so perfectly. Like it's incredible to me that this is not a soundtrack that was tailor-made for this game. It's almost unbelievable to me that they found something so perfect for this. And like, I kind of think this sometimes, like, of course it seems perfect to me because that's what it is. And if something else replaced it tomorrow, it would feel weird. And if something else was there from day one, I would say that felt really good. But I think this is just a perfect fit. You mentioned the Red Rock Riviera, the song that plays when you're on the main street outside of the hotel. The horns that play when you walk out the door, they immediately set this emotional tone for the game. And that tone remains the rest of the time. Because sometimes it's not as musical. Sometimes it's more atonal, like droning in the harbor, or when you're out on the other side across the canal. It's a lot more like laid back and less like, traditional music, I guess, more ambient soundscape, but it's all excellent. And there's a couple of songs that play throughout the course of the game that like legit bring emotion in me when I hear them during the game.
It's all after an affect. It's not after a melody, and it's not after lyrics because they took those out. It's after an affect. It's after creating this sense of emotion. Like the Red Rock Riviera is a good one because although it's technically using sort of major harmonies and, horns are a brighter instrument, trumpets specifically, but it's got this sense of looking inward to you. It's nostalgic in a way that is not bitter, but remorseful almost. It's really we don't have time to gush about this for the next 2 hours, Dave.
Yeah.
which we could do. to be clear. We could do it.
It's excellent, and people who are listening, they've heard, cuts from the soundtrack up until this point and continuing throughout the rest of the episode. I love to cut in music, and man, this OST is just so good. And even the rave song when you're dealing with Egghead and his buddies, I listen to that song when I work at school just all the time. Fantastic. So let's take one last little break before it's spoiler time. When we come back, we're going to give our final thoughts in summary for the people who have not played before we get into spoilers. Back. We're going to give our kind of final thoughts about Disco Elysium. So guest always goes first. Rick, what would you tell people about Disco Elysium who haven't played it? Try to sum up all the things we've said up until this point.
I think in terms of recommending it, I would to anybody. I think the only, point of consideration for some people might be the sheer amount of reading. I would say it's done well enough that it's probably going to be something that will be easy to get over if you're averse to that sort of thing. I think this game is less of a game and more of a work. It's important with a capital I. It's holding up a mirror to not just to other video games, but to the human condition. And I know that sounds pretentious. I can be pretentious, as you've probably noticed in this podcast, but I can't it's such an easy 10 out of 10 for me.
Yeah. As I've said before on my Hollow Knight episode, 10 out of 10 is not something that I throw out easily when I talk about games, because there's really no such thing as a perfect game except for Tetris, in my opinion. But Disco Elysium is a 10 out of 10, like easy recommendation, like Rick said, to anybody except for people who, like, if you play games to kind of turn your brain off, which is totally cool. I do that too. I'm going to play Rocket League later maybe and just turn my brain off and have a good time. So if that's all you want out of a video game, and again, that's perfectly fine. You enjoy video games the way you want to. But for everybody else, I think you have to play Disco Elysium. If you haven't, you have to make time for this. And this is not a Baldur's Gate 2 100-hour game. This game took 20 hours or 25 hours the first time I played it. It took longer my second time because I was listening to all the voice lines. I said I was going to talk about that later, and then I forgot to, but here it is. It took longer because I did not skip voice acting. It's that good. So, yeah, definite recommendation. The RPG systems are very creative, especially how the skills jump in during your conversations and kind of show how different parts of your personality influence the way you talk to people. The thought cabinet is interesting. Maybe it's not a total success, but it is interesting. And the way that they handle skill checks, I think is best in class for this type of RPG. And we've talked about the writing a ton. That is just top notch. I'd be hard pressed to think of a video game that has better writing than Disco Elysium. So yeah, easy recommendation. I think this game is worth full price. Sometimes we talk about price on the game. Video games are an expensive hobby. So it's been a couple years now. Disco Elysium does go at least half price on sale. So if you want to wait for that, I understand. But I think it's definitely worth the full $40 price. So.
True, hard, full, core. Hardcore. Hardcore to the mega.
Earlier in the episode, I should just say, and one last thing. when you get the chance to take a nap later in the game, do it.
Internally coherent. All core. All right. Yeah. Gotta get the people going.
Before we get into spoilers, let's do a little housekeeping. And before I talk about my stuff, Rick is the co-host of the Pixel Project Radio podcast, a show that I really, really enjoy listening to. So, Rick, why don't you tell our listeners what your show's about?
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate that. I truly do. So Pixel Project Radio, we are a show that typically we play through a game and then we, just talk about it. We are certainly not the first to sort of take a book club style approach. There have been several at this point, but it's nice. It's a creative outlet for us. I think we generally have pretty good conversations. And sometimes we also just talk about general video game stuff like difficulty in video games or the history of consoles or things like that. So it's a good time. We do tend to do pretty long episodes. So no problem if you do decide to listen, if you break that up, because we are long-winded in a way.
Well, this episode's getting on 2 hours now, even before the spoiler section. So we're, I don't think a lot of people are strangers to long podcasts at this point. I do want to say for the listeners, I listen to Pixel Project Radio every time a new episode comes out. I really enjoy the conversation. It's always very, very thoughtful. And I very much appreciate that when there are a lot of video games podcasts that are like, the bros get together and rip on each other and do that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy the thoughtful nature of Pixel Project Radio. So everyone check that out.
Thank you, Dave.
Now it's time to talk about me. Enough about you, Rick.
Please, by all means. I mean, could I talk about a top 3 podcast?
Yeah.
I love a top 3 podcast.
Sure.
It was introduced to me by the phrase, the time-honored tradition of top 3 lists, and it's pretty great. One of my personal favorite episodes so far was, the stand-up comedian episode was good, but I'm specifically thinking of the Fair Food.
Oh yeah,
Fair Foods one.
Yeah,
terrific.
We definitely we take pride in sometimes having thoughtful conversations, but a lot of our best episodes are about food. So. Yeah, so that's a top 3 podcast, and me and 3 of my buddies from high school, we pick a topic, and we pick our top 3s in that topic and discuss. By the time you hear this episode, you will have heard Rick on a top 3 podcast talking about Beatles songs. So if you have not listened to that episode, go and check it out. As for this show, thank you for listening up until this point. If you're going to tap out because of spoilers, if you would like to support this show, the best thing to do is tell your friends about it and leave ratings and reviews on whatever platform you're listening on that allows it, specifically Apple Podcasts. And if you're listening on Good Pods, leave a rating and review. And you can chat with me. Actually, you can chat with me on Good Pods if you want to, but also the social media pages for Tales from the Backlog at Tales from the Backlog on Instagram and Facebook, though I'm much more active on Instagram. And then on Twitter let's see if I can do this from memory, at TFTBLpod. Yes, that's it. I'm most active on Instagram and Twitter, so I'm happy to chat, especially if you want to talk Disco Elysium. Hit me up. So we are going to take a break. When we come back, it is full spoiler time for Disco Elysium. Okay, and we're back. It's time for spoilers for Disco Elysium. Before we get into talking about it, I want to kind of make a disclaimer here. In the interest of time, we are not going to get to every detail, every conversation, or even every plot point. Actually, not even close to it. There's going to be a lot of things that we skip, and I want to say right at the beginning, if we skip something, it's not because it's not worth your time. It's because this game is very, very dense, and I can't do a 7-hour podcast episode. I do want to just say that, like, everything in Disco Elysium is worth your time, and I really can't stress how amazing that is. Most games cannot claim that. Every conversation in Disco Elysium is worth your time. Now, with that being said, since we talked about at the beginning, we talked about the kind of first couple moments of the game. You wake up in your hotel room. You probably die turning on the lights or trying to get the fan down. You join Kim, and then your first task is to get the body down from the tree. So, Rick, do you remember how you got the body down?
Yeah, my first playthrough, I was successful in shooting the body down. Kim is not such a good shot because of his eyes, and if you shoot it down, they get a little fist bump moment. It's pretty nice.
Yes.
But the second time, I actually failed that pretty bad. I had to get Everett Clare to pull some strings, as it were, to get that body down.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I succeeded on the shot both times, so I never really knew how to get it down other than that. I'm glad you mentioned that fist bump moment. I actually screenshotted this when I was playing it on my Switch because it was so good. Like, you give Kim a high five, and then one of your skills is like, go for the down low, and so you do, and then another one chimes in like, Kim's not going to do a down low. He's not that kind of person. And then he does. And it's just really cool.
Yeah, I think that's how you get the thought cabinet aces low.
Yes,
right?
It is. Yeah. And so while you're doing this, we didn't really talk about, I alluded to Kuno in the non-spoiler section, but we didn't really talk about him. Before we get to later in the story where Kuno may or may not become more important, how did you feel about Kuno and the change in voice actor too?
Kuno is a hellish little goblin, and I love him so much. I do miss the original voice actor. He really captured the manic, drug-addicted 12-year-old that Kuno is.
Yes, something we all have experience with.
Of course, yeah. It's as American as, well, let's not get into that.
Yeah.
But no, I love Kuno so much. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Kuno's great, and I love how, like, throughout the course of the game, he starts out as this fucking goblin. And as you go, if you really talk to Kuno a lot, you can kind of break that down a little bit. And then in a very realistic way, once Kuno realizes that you've broken it down, he puts that right back up and starts screaming at you again. It's very well thought out, I think. And
yeah,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say the one of the first interactions you can have with Kuno is if he's getting tired of you, he just starts wailing and screaming that you're pulling out your penis and you're gonna, do unsavory things, and you're just kind of like, be cool. And Kim was like, I told you this was a bad idea.
Yeah.
And he's just screaming and wailing, and then he like gets up close to you and he whispers, he's like, I've got you right where I want you. Like,
he's such a little shit.
He really is. But like you said, it's really rewarding to kind of like get to the other side and, figure out who he is for real and why he acts like this.
Yeah. That same thing happens with Kuno S, actually. If you walk up on Kuno S from the other side of the fence, she starts yelling that you're trying to, grope her or something like that. And those two. So once you get the body down, you have to do the field autopsy, which is one of my favorite scenes from like the first couple days of the game. And you do this field autopsy. This is where you first get this, like, this is where you see Kim in action for the first time. And you're like, oh, this guy is a fucking professional. like the way he goes through the field autopsy. There is a moment in the field autopsy where you're inspecting different parts of the dead body, and then it gets down to like his crotch, and one of your thoughts pops in. I think it's electrochemistry that was like, inspect the genitals. And so you look, and then electrochemistry pops in again, and it's like, you should touch his penis. And then if you click it, it gives like this paragraph description of like this dead body's penis. And I screenshotted those too. Those are, I don't know if I should share those screenshots, because those are, spoiler stuff within the first 45 minutes of the game, but or maybe the first couple hours of the game, but still very entertaining. Rick, were you able to find the bullet in the dead body?
Yeah. So I can't remember which playthrough was which, but one of them I did and one of them I didn't.
Okay.
Weirdly enough, even though that is the de facto way that the mercenary was killed, doesn't really have a huge impact on how you solve the case.
Yeah. Interesting. So like
it accelerates it a little bit, but
yeah,
there's still so much more to be done.
Right. Yeah, because we're in the spoiler section. You don't find the killer until the very end of the game. So let's see. Oh, one other kind of memory I have about this kind of thing in the backyard is you have a visual calculus check to count the steps, the footprints and stuff like that. And I died because I failed to count the footprints in the backyard. And that was one of the ways I died early in the game. And it's just a hilarious way to die, because you feel so bad that you can't count that you just straight up drop dead.
I guess that's where Harry draws the line, is not knowing how to count. That does it. That same check, if you pass it, also leads to a nice moment with Kim, where you find, you'll find the sole markings of each shoe, and one of them is worn down because it was belonging to a lorry driver. But you don't know that at first, and Kim is speculating, and he says, maybe it was this, or maybe it was this, or maybe it was a drummer. And then you get this, one of your thoughts says, like, press him on the drummer thing.
Yeah. And
then you can kind of tease him about it, and you can keep bringing that up as the game goes. Like, yeah, we're looking for a drummer. And Kim is just like, oh my God.
Yeah, there's a couple of those things where, like, Kim will say something, and then your guy, like a little kid would do, will just bring it up over and over again. And Kim's like, should I never mention that around this guy? Moving on. This is still on day one. You go talk to Everard Clare. I really enjoy that conversation where, like, you think and Everard Clare thinks that he has you in his palm. He doesn't really. You do have to do this quest for him to progress the story. But what I do want to talk about is how the fact that you have a boss battle, a dialogue boss battle against a chair, is very funny, and I think about it every time I sit in a bad chair now. Every single time I remember this scene. So your character, you sit down and you remark, like, I think you said, like, this is the most uncomfortable chair you've ever been in. It's violating your backside. And you have to do, I think it's a pain threshold or an endurance check. And if you fail and you don't have your health topped up, you can die from sitting in an uncomfortable chair. And that's, again, very, very funny to me. And I didn't die, but if I did, I would have thought that was just hilarious.
Yeah, you got to think of the implications of that, like Kim and Everett just being there as you have a heart attack from a chair being so uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's so good. And, like, they can see that you're struggling with it, even if you do pass that check. They can see, like, you're having a hard time. Like, sweat is, like, pouring down your face and stuff like that. And... it's so good.
Everard Clare too is one of my maybe not favorite characters, but I like him quite a bit. He's this beguiling slime ball that he will do. He's for the working class. He's a self-described leftist, but he will go to so many unsavory lengths to get ahead to the point where it's like, you have to ask, is he how deluded is he that he believes that he's, helping the good of everybody while he's, the definition of a fat cat on top.
Yeah, they do give you interesting things to think about like that. Like, he's a union boss, and I am pro-union, but he's not like like you said, he's definitely not doing this for the good of, the people. He's not doing the things he's doing for the good of the people. And the errands that he sends you on to kind of get his trust and stuff like that, those are not great, the things you have to do, like intimidation tactics and stuff like that, and getting people's signatures later in the game so they can basically make these people's lives a living hell while they build something in their neighborhood. Those are bad. So the first one, I don't know if you have a choice to get his thing. You have to leave that door open. The second one, you can forge the signatures and not and kind of like fuck up his process, or at least delay it. And so I did that because I don't want to help him as much as I do like unions as an idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can just choose not to help him or not. I think I ended up I remember Kim said something like, this is definitely shady, but this is going to help us. We should, maybe just this once. So I think I got the signatures and just played ball with him a little bit.
Yeah, at least for the first one, you need money to buy your hotel room, and money is kind of hard to come by without doing that. So I did it for the money, and it's very funny that when you do it, he pays you with a giant novelty check. This is kind of like it's not an under the counter deal. It's he's broadcasting to everybody like, hey, the police are doing stuff for me.
And a great thing too is you can cash the check, but you can also take it to Gart, the hostel owner, to try and pay for your room with the check.
Yeah.
Which just it makes Gart incensed. He's already not happy with you, but
yeah,
it's pretty good. Poor Gart. Gart really gets the short end of the stick. He gets shafted so much in this game. Yeah,
nothing good really happens for him until maybe later when you can bring him a new bird to put on the wall. But other than that, everything around him is just being ruined by you, basically. One other thing kind of in this like opening section, you get the idea to look in like the dumpster in the backyard of the hotel, and in there you find your police clipboard. And opening up the clipboard, you find a note from your ex-wife or ex-girlfriend. I think it was ex-wife.
Ex-wife, yeah.
Yeah. And this is one of those like emotional intelligence things that this game has. Opening that note and seeing it just immediately throws you into this doom spiral, which, like, anyone who has been through a breakup, maybe not even a bad breakup, a breakup that brings you sadness or like brought you pain, sometimes you get those little reminders, and it's not a slow, step down into sadness. It's like immediately you're down in the pit. And that's what happens when you see this note. And I think that that's just really well realized by the writers here.
Yeah, you can go through the entire game without doing anything regarding your ex.
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree with them for setting it up that way, because it is such an important part of who the character is. But it is interesting to think about going through this entire game without doing anything relating to her.
Yeah, especially later in the game when you have that scene where you kind of dream like talking to her, which is such an emotional scene, and it's completely optional. You don't have to do that. And the way that you do that is not something that I think a lot of players would do. I should cut into the earlier in the episode. I should just say, oh, and one last thing. When you get the chance to take a nap later in the game, do it. It should be mandatory.
It's really puckish of them to hide what I consider to be the emotional climax of the entire game.
Yeah.
behind an optional sequence. And they do it again shortly thereafter with the encounter with the Phasmid. You can miss that if you don't make the Inland Empire check.
Right.
And I think those two together, they sort of interweave with each other to create this horrific emotional downward spiral and then into hope to create this beautiful ending message.
Yeah.
And you could miss both of it. Like, why did they do that?
Yeah, it's certainly a choice, and like, I'm glad that I did those both, because I didn't play with a guide my first time, which is unusual for me. I usually play games with guides, and I could not imagine playing it and missing those two things, and then talking to somebody and they're like, hey, like, man, that conversation with the ex-wife was brutal, wasn't it? And I'm like, what? Or the Phasmid. I couldn't imagine missing those because they're so key to like the way this game ends and pays off all the emotion throughout the course of the game. So yeah, I'm gonna cut this in earlier in the episode. Oh, and one last thing before we go: when you have the chance to take a nap, do it. When Kim suggests that you take a nap, take the nap. Trust me. Okay, and we can move on. Let's see. So, end of the first day, I think a couple other things. This is not like a really super meaningful conversation, but you go up on the balcony and have a conversation with Kim on night one, and I just thought that was a very smart little tiny scene to have, kind of a wrap up of the day. You and Kim are starting to get to know each other. You learn that Kim has one cigarette per day, like at night, as a ritual as he's going over what he learned that day and what he did that day. And that just reminded me of a couple of like memories that I have, good memories with friends. You know, the end of a night, traveling usually, sit, have a beer, talk about what we did, you know, talk about some stuff. Those are good memories that I have, and this scene really brought that back.
Kim is so cool. I just like when he's like, yeah, I have one a day. Kim is so cool. I'm going to take up smoking to be like Kim.
But Kim also, I think you can ask him, like, isn't it hard to just have one a day? And Kim's like, it's extremely hard. Like, it takes all of my willpower to just have one a day.
That's just the kind of guy Kim is.
Yeah, for sure.
Self-restrained.
And then after that kind of balcony conversation, you go to sleep and you have a dream, which is just... It is a, like, if you haven't realized like what kind of game this is by now, this dream is pretty wild. So you have a dream about the hanged man, but instead of the dead body, it's you. And this is where you find your character's backstory. And you could have seen it already if you looked in the clipboard, but now you find out like just how badly you fucked up everything in your life. Like, you find out that you were the one who got dumped. You did not break up with her. You got dumped. You don't have any friends, and your body is, poisoned basically with all the drugs and alcohol. And it really hammers you with like just how bad your character has it. Harry, we can say his name, how bad Harry has it.
This is far and away one of my favorite scenes in the game. It's so visually striking, and it is a manifest of the game's title. We're seeing disco. Harry is a literal disco ball, but also learning that he is a relic of the past. He's still hanging on. And Elysium, I remember Elysium is a circle of hell in Dante's Inferno. We're seeing that, physically with Harry hanging there, but also learning about his past. He is hurting something fierce, and what he has done to cope with that is destroy his body with just virulent alcohol and drug abuse. This is I mentioned at the very top of the episode that there were like a couple, like 2 or 3 scenes that really hooked me. The first one was I want to have fuck with you, because that's just so funny.
Yep.
But this scene was when I was like, I am playing this game and nothing else for the next month.
And yeah, the scenery as you're in that scene, there are lights reflecting off of a disco ball. You get I think it's the the lizard brain voice that's doing the dialogue in this scene, which is super deep and gravelly. It's just a very very powerful scene. You've had the idea up until now because you woke up with a hangover, you died because you tried to get your tie down. You have an idea that Harry's not in a good place, but this is where you find out how bad it is, and this is where you can start the redemption arc if that's what you're going for. So, on the next day, I want to just talk about, maybe kind of go chronologically a little bit, but talk about things as they come up. So, you talk to the kind of Union mob, I guess, I want to say. The Union, the toughs. They're called the Hardy Boys. And you start this kind of quest line that really you need to talk to them a lot and get information about the case from them. And then that gets you back talking to Classe, the woman who you want to make fuck with. And instead of going beat by beat through the story as you do, just want to condense it all in here. So how did you like the group, the Hardy Boys, and how you have to interact with them over and over again?
I think they are incredibly well realized and realistic. I don't know about you, Dave, but I grew up in a really small rural sort of town, and there was not an actual union that was the de facto law, because that's just not how America works. But there certainly were these groups of people that belong to organizations like the firefighters or whatever, and they acted just like this. And they're macho, they're drinking 8% beers in the daytime, they're gonna fuck you up, and they make numerous slurs against gay people. It's, while one of them in fact is gay themselves, it's just so well realized. But what I liked the most about it is, as this time went on, Titus goes through such immense character development and growth. And it's at the very end, I know we're going chronologically, but you did ask to sum it up here. At the very end, you can kind of have this moment where you shake his hand and you're like, if you ever want to don a badge, we'd love to have you. And and Titus is like, yeah, and if you ever get tired of the uniform, you'd make a hell of a Hardy Boy. And it's what an emotional payoff.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, because when you first talk to them, they hate your guts. You are there to basically just pry in their business and make their life miserable. And throughout the course of the game, you just slowly chip away at that. And you have this real, hey, we're not so different, you and I, type of moment at the end. It's really good. And the kind of that burgeoning respect between Harry and Titus and Kim as well is very, very good. And part of that is based on what happens during the tribunal, which we'll talk about later. But it's just an excellent, they start out super non-cooperative. You have to pass a lot of skill checks just to get them to share anything with you. And then it slowly becomes easier and easier as the case unravels. One of those skill checks I want to mention is if you fail an authority check to kind of get Titus to tell you the real story, you get an option to ask for Kim's gun, because you haven't found yours probably by this point. And so you ask for Kim's gun, and he's like, okay. And he gives you his gun, and you have this dialogue check to put the gun in your mouth, or this option in dialogue to put the gun in your mouth. And I clicked it because I was like, okay, Harry's going to try some kind of power play here, or some desperate, if you don't tell me what I need, I'm going to kill myself. And that's what he did. And that failed. And he actually does shoot himself during that scene. And you get a game over that says cop loses it, shoots himself in hostile or something like that. And I was like, holy shit, that was not where I was expecting it to go. But it's another thing that just shows you how fucking unhinged Harry is.
I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah. It's you have to go through a lot of dialogue and failed checks to get to it, but it's there. It's real messed up.
Jeez Louise, that's incredible.
Ooh, yeah. And the other part of that equation is Clausier, who you talk to. She's the first NPC you talk to, and then she kind of goes away for a while until you find out part of the Hardy Boys' story is that the mercenary, the dead body, the mercenary had raped Clausier, and so you need to go talk to her again, and you slowly put together her side of things, and it turns out that she was, you know, maybe not in a relationship with, but definitely, you know, having a good time with the mercenary. And she has a pretty interesting character too, because she starts out as this, like, you think she's just like this young party girl who's holed up here. She kind of mentions that she's on the run, but won't really get into why. You have to actually piece that together yourself. And then it turns out that she is much, much more than that. And I like that kind of character swing. And by the time you figure it all out, she's gone.
Yeah, that whole reveal with her was, I didn't dislike it. It was just one of those things where I was just like, okay, like I'm going to go along for the ride with this. I did really like how her character developed though. And it was it was really cool to, you know, see the Hardy Boys, see their story just unravel because Claudia is not cooperating with them. So much so to the point where if you confront Titus, and you're like, look, we talked with Claudia and she said this, that contradicts what you said. He just gets immediately irate and he's like, that fucking bitch. And like, it's such an interesting dynamic of not just politics and random accident, but also a love relationship with the mercenary. And then also, you know, Titus had a bit of unrequited feelings with her. And then I think they all kind of did. And it's just so many things at play. And it's really good.
Yeah. I like the revelation that she's some kind of super spy that's on the run. That is fine. And honestly, a little bit too much. Like, I don't think it fits super well with everyone else in the story. I'm not mad at it, but it's fine. But the interplay between her story that she and the Hardy Boys had cooked up and how you pick at that story and get the truth, and you're constantly going back between her and Titus. Like you said, I really like how that develops and how you figure out how these characters have relationships with one another. And also Ruby, that's her name, right? The one you go find under the building. So yeah, Clausier's story itself is a mystery also, and finding out who she really is was kind of fun because you get the feeling, and Kim kind of remarks throughout the course of it, like, hey, something's up with her. We should figure this out. The conclusion is, you know, like I said, fine, but it's overall good. Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because what you learn about the mercenaries is they're all bad people. They have committed crimes against humanity, but they didn't do it this time.
Yeah.
So it brings this moral quandary into it. It's like, they're innocent. Technically, they're bad people, but they're innocent. And now the Hardy Boys, on the other hand, they didn't really have a hand in the actual crime, but they're deliberately obfuscating it for personal reasons. And now we're just adding another layer onto this. That's why I said, like, if you play this just for the detective story, it's not the greatest one, like you said, Dave, but it's a darn good one.
Yeah. And you do have that moment when you first talk to the Hardy Boys and they're like, yep, we killed him. And you're like, oh, wasn't expecting that. Now, obviously, you find out soon after that they didn't actually kill him, but this game definitely subverts a lot of detective story things that you might be accustomed to. And it starts out right at the beginning. The first time you talk with like the main suspects, they're like, yep, that was us. We're not going to tell you which one because they have this weird like Barry Zuckercorn thing where they're like, you can't charge us all with the crime, which, you know, you probably can. You can take them all in, but yeah. So Yeah. Anything else about the Hardy Boys and Classier's storyline before we move on?
I don't think so. The rooftop talks
Yeah.
with Claudia are about the only other thing. I thought her voice actor did such a great job, and it's also one of my favorite scenes in the game, where you're talking with Claudia, and it's a check. I don't remember. It might be Volition. But you're talking with her, and then you pass this check, and then you have this like dialogue with your inner thoughts, and they come to the conclusion that Claudia has been manipulating you. And then it just goes down the list. They're like, this thought's been compromised, and then that thought will chime in and be like, no, I'm not at all. And then they'll be like, yeah, but remember this, and then they're like, oh my god, she has me around her finger. And it's this like really brilliant moment where you're like, these thoughts are not infallible to me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So good. So good.
Yeah, I was meaning to mention in the before spoilers section that your thoughts almost play as like RPG party members talking and sometimes talking to each other, and that's a good scene, a good example of that. So more on the Hardy Boys when we talk about the Tribunal in a little bit. But I want to talk about the scene where you find your car and your badge. And this scene hits like a truck. This is a very emotional thing at this point, because you've been looking for your gun and you've been looking for your badge. Basically the two things that would give you any authority up until this point you don't have. And you have kind of a lead on your gun, but you don't get it until much later. But as soon as you cross the river, the first thing you're going to see is a car submerged in ice. And your first thought, or like Harry's first thought, is like, whoa, what kind of idiot would do that? And this is like a recurring thing through the game. You're always that idiot. That idiot is always Harry. And so that scene where you talk with Kim, and Kim is like he doesn't yell at you. He's very supportive in like a way that he has like this emotional intelligence that knows like this is a time to be like, hey, I know you fucked up, but like it's going to be okay, buddy. Like that scene was very, very powerful.
And Kim knows from the beginning that it's your car. So
oh yeah.
You tell him like, and we should say you could do this without Kim and it's not as rewarding, but Kim will say like, yeah, maybe we could check on that later. And then you say, well, let's sit on the swing set and just wait for the tide to go down. Mm-hmm. So you sit with Kim and, you slowly but surely have this crushing realization that this was you. I think everybody who, for better or for worse, has had alcohol troubles knows like, there's a certain point where you need to play detective with yourself, and you are realizing what it is you have done and how that can be just crushing. And Kim is there through the whole thing, and he's basically telling you it's, we'll get through it.
Yeah, he's not telling you like, hey, no big deal, buddy, but he's at the same time very serious about it. Like, hey, this is a super expensive car you ruined. But he's not scolding you and he's not yelling at you. He's emotionally there the way that he should be. And it's just really good. And this is also where you find your badge that tells you Harry's full name, Harrier Dubois, which Harrier is a great name. Really enjoyed that. Did you stick with Harry both games, or did you go with the other name, which I'm forgetting right now?
Raphael Ambrosius Cousteau.
Right, that's the one.
No, I just went with Harry both times because I'm boring, I guess.
I was on the redemption path both times, and part of the redemption path to me is, your real name, not taking on a new persona. So that was good. Another kind of emotional moment here. Actually, it's all emotional moments from here on out. On the kind of fishing village side, you find a dead body on the dock, and you do a little quick deduction, Sherlock Holmes style. You figure that this person was drunk. They were eating a kebab, and they kind of slipped through a hole in the dock and $1 million babied themselves on a bench and killed themselves. And so you have to do a little side case, which Kim is like, yeah, this is probably the right thing to do. We can't just like leave a dead body without telling anybody. And you do a little detective work. You call your station. You actually call the library because you find a library card, I think, and that's how you get his information. And you find out where this person lived, and you go to their house. And before you open the door, Kim gives you a pep talk, and it's really good. Kim is like, "Hey, are you ready? Are you ready for this?" And you can say to Kim like, "Hey, I don't know how to handle this. I don't know what to do." And it's another just fantastic scene from Kim.
Yeah, it was a tough scene to get through, a tough quest to get through.
And when you go into the house and you talk to the woman in there, you may recognize her because earlier she was standing outside the bookstore. And I didn't do this, but I heard about this. There's a dialogue option when you talk to her outside the bookstore earlier, like days earlier. And you can ask like, "Hey, where's your husband?" or something like that. And she kind of passes that dialogue off. And then you find out it's her husband who's been dead on this dock. He was dead the whole time. So if you remember that from earlier, it just adds a little bit more to like an already pretty sad scene when you have to break this husband's death to this woman. And she says something like, "Okay, well, I have to tell my daughter." And you're like, "Oh, fuck, they have a daughter. God damn it." It's a great scene.
It's one of those scenes where even if you do it the correct way, it's not a good outcome. And, you know, Kim, I think it's telling too that Kim doesn't want to take the lead on it because he knows how hard this could be.
Yeah. And this...
sorry.
Oh, it's all right. I was just going to say, this is something that, like, if you watch a lot of cop shows, you know, Law and Order and stuff like that, there's a lot of scenes where they go to the house and they say, "I'm sorry, ma'am, your husband's dead." And this hits harder in this game than it ever does in those shows. And I just think it's part of the emotional kind of attachment you have to the game, the way that, like, you know Harry is not prepared to do this. Like, mentally, he is not prepared. And Kim is just such a solid partner, getting you ready for this and being next to you and supporting you. It's so good.
Yeah, and you end up leaving and just hear her sobbing as you're gone. It's really tough.
Yeah.
It's a really tough scene.
Especially because like, she is living in like a tenement. They already did not have a comfortable life, and now it's gotten much, much worse. It will be much, much worse for that woman and her kid. And you leave with that knowledge. Kim like says, "Hey, you did a great job. Like, I know this sucks, but you did great." And just getting compliments from Kim is, well, it's fantastic. So yeah. Total tone shift here, but moving on, let's talk about karaoke. So, did you do the karaoke side quest?
Yes, yeah, I did the karaoke. I sang it twice. Once I failed it, once I succeeded.
Okay, cool. So I failed it both times, and again, we talked about this earlier, but failing in Disco Elysium is good. And which one do you prefer? The failing one or the success?
Failing by a wide margin.
Yeah.
When you succeed, it's just narrated by the narrator, the ancient reptilian brain.
Right.
And that's not to say that that's bad, but because it's quite good. But when you fail it, it's just this caterwauling of Harry on stage trying to communicate his his feelings of despondence and despair in the only way he is capable, which is not coming off positively at all.
Right.
And it's unskippable, by the way. 3 minutes of unskippable wailing.
Yeah.
And nobody is pleased afterwards. But you ask Kim, like, what did you think? And Kim says, I liked it.
Yeah. He says, like,
it was real.
Yeah. He says, like, hey, you bared your soul up there. I enjoyed it. The failure song is sung by the Limbic System voice actor, which is really high and like almost falsetto. It's a horrible singing performance, but it reminded me of all the times I've ever seen somebody who was clearly going through some shit get up at karaoke and just sing their fucking heart out. And it's, you know, it's horrible most of the time. It's not great to listen to, but I mean, I've definitely sung some karaoke songs that had a little extra emotion behind them. And I remember one time in college, I was at a buddy's house and some other guy had gone through a breakup really, really recently. And he sang Total Eclipse of the Heart. And he gave just 1000% of his soul in that performance. And this reminded me of that. It's a very good scene.
There's something to be said about that. You know, as professional musicians, we're trained to communicate ideas and emotions and affects even when we're not going through it, and it's successful a lot of the time. But it's a different thing to hear somebody that doesn't have those skills, or maybe not honed to the same degree, go up and do a performance on sheer emotion. It taps into this not ingenuity, intimacy and rawness that is hard to replicate. And, you know, just thinking about Harry, who not only has nobody aside from Kim that really understands him, but doesn't really understand himself in that moment, trying to deal with these emotions in real time in the only way that he is able to without actively destroying his body. It really, you know, it hits home.
Yeah.
And maybe that's, you know, for better or for worse kind of deal, but yeah,
man, it's an excellent scene. And you just get a side quest that says, like, sing karaoke, and you might be inclined to just treat that as like, sing karaoke, you know, like, whatever, if I have time, if I find the tape, and if I find, you know, stuff, like if I can convince Gart to let me go do it, sure. But if not, fine. But this is one of my favorite memories from the game, other than like the big, no, actually this is a big emotional payoff here. And yeah, it's fantastic.
Often go there to the tiny church there, the smallest church in Sanson, though it once was larger. How the real may rest there.
Speaking of emotional payoffs, next up on the list is talking about the Tribunal, which is a very heavy thing. And this is the prime example of how this game can convey tension and like danger all through dialogue and the way that things are set up. Like, you get to the Tribunal, the mercenaries found out that one of their mercenary buddies is dead and that the Union toughs are the ones who did it. Again, false information, but that's what they know. So they're coming to basically paint the town red. And you have this thing where you jump in the middle of the Tribunal. And Rick, can you talk them all down, or does it always escalate to violence?
There is not a situation to get through the Tribunal with none of your people dying.
Right. I didn't think so.
I think there is a minimum of 3 that definitely will die, but depending on how you handle the checks and what you say and when you say it too, like that has an impact. As many as I think 7 plus can die.
Right. And I think in both of my games, at least 5 people died both times, because it's an extremely tense situation. And we talked earlier about how some of these checks, like realistically, you should not be able to retry them. And this is one of those situations, like, of course, if you fuck up, say the wrong thing to someone who's drunk and has a gun, they're going to react poorly, and you don't get a retry on things like that, of course. So the scene's extremely tense, and some of the Union members, the Hardy Boys, can die. But most importantly, Kim can die here. So did you experience that?
So he doesn't die.
He doesn't die?
Say that.
I thought he died.
He goes to the hospital.
Oh, I thought he died. Okay.
No. But to answer your question, Dave, what happens is you experience the only unmissable check in the game, or I should say only mandatory failure in the game of a check. You get shot. Right. And Kim comes to tend to you, and there's an authority check.
It's authority, yeah.
Where you can say, Kim, look out behind you. And you can either save him or, you fail it and you just kind of gurgle and, Kim gets shot. My first playthrough, much to my dismay, Kim got shot. So I did the ending with Kuno, which we could talk about.
Right.
But this most recent playthrough, Kim, my authority was good and Kim really trusted me. So I did warn him.
Yeah. And isn't that just so great when you're doing that check and you see, because when you're seeing the checks, you see a list of all the bonuses you have, and you get a bonus like, +1, Kim trusts you. And then there's another bonus that's like +1 or +2, Kim really trusts you. And I was like, oh yeah. So I don't think I was in any real danger of missing that check both times. My first time I had pretty high authority, and this time I knew that was coming, so I made sure I was wearing any clothes that gave me extra authority and stuff like that. But yeah, I passed it both times. So let's talk about Kuno now. I don't know. Do you think it's better to talk about Kuno's ending now, or like we can talk about it bit by bit of how it's different with Kuno?
I think either one would be just fine. Before we move away from the tribunal, though, I did want to ask.
Okay.
Either time, did you get the spirit bomb?
No, I actually have no idea what you're talking about, so no.
Oh, this is perfect. So one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the horrific necktie. The horrific necktie is this really gaudy tie that speaks to you throughout the game. And at one point or another, if you pick up, the necktie will talk about picking up alcohol, and you can pick up surgeon level, like cleansing alcohol. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, the necktie will say, put me in and I'll let you know when the time is right. You can do it. And Kim is like, what are you doing? And you'll say, oh, my tie was talking to me. And Kim is like, okay, bud. But, so you get there, and when you show up to the tribunal, the necktie will the necktie will cry out. He's like, now. This is it. And you light it on fire and toss it like a makeshift Molotov cocktail. And as it's this weirdly beautiful moment where it's soaring through the air and time slows, and the necktie and you have this conversation, and, they reminisce about how you first met and how you look like a schlub, and this was going to, put some color into your wardrobe. And, if you didn't do any drinking, the necktie will be like, I tried to have fun with you, but you seemed against it at all. Mm-hmm. At all opportunities. So maybe I am a failure, but it lets you take out a significant amount of the fight. Like you can really burn them alive.
Interesting.
It's something else. It's something.
Yeah. I didn't do that either time. I was able to get a few gunshots. Like I had great hand-eye coordination and physical skills my second playthrough, so I was able to shoot a couple of the mercenaries, but actually, that didn't help much because most of the Hardy Boys died during that. So, yeah, that's interesting with the spirit bomb. So moving on, we have a couple of, well, just real quick, you find Ruby, who's like the hidden Hardy Boy, and maybe she happens before the tribunal, probably, but she's using this concentrated like radio frequency thing to like break you down, and I thought that was a cool scene where like you and Kim are in a ton of pain, and there's a check to like pain threshold maybe to get through that and break the machine, and depending on how that goes and depending on other things you say, Ruby will either kill herself or she'll run away. So how did that play out for you?
I've had both happen. This most recent playthrough, she kills herself. She killed herself, I should say. And it's really shocking. You have the choice to like really have it affect you as Harry, or you can just be like, we've got to just move on.
Mm-hmm.
I did the latter. I was like, we just got to keep going. And Kim kind of comments on it, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's weird that you're not emotional over this, but whatever. Yeah, I don't know that it has an impact on anything else outside of that.
Yeah, it was just an interesting thing, because my first playthrough, she killed herself, and it was very shocking. Just a testament to how this game can give you these emotional moments. Really shocking she killed herself. And my second time, I was able to get through and break the device and then talk her out of killing herself. But talking her out of it means you have to let her go. And she's kind of a suspect in the case at that point. And Kim is kind of like, okay, well, you let her go. I sure hope we can find who did it, you know?
And it's really sad if you let her go, because you can, or if she kills herself, I should say, and you can read her diary, and she does so because she's scared of you.
Yeah.
She refers to you as the can opener. You're able to just open people up, and she mistakenly thinks that you're part of the mob,
right?
Like that world's mafia, and that you're an agent of them. And you come to find out later that you would have been approached if you weren't just a completely malfunctioning alcoholic.
Right.
But yeah, it's really sad. And I like to think that if she gets away, she realizes that that's not the case, but who's to say?
Yeah. And it does put that little doubt in your head, because anything is really possible. It puts that doubt in your head about whether you're, this like mob enforcer, dirty cop. And yeah, like you said, you only find out at the end that you weren't, because you're such a train wreck, not even the mob would take you. So, yeah. Let's get into the kind of three climaxes of the game. I'm not sure if that's a word, but the three kind of big payoffs at the end. So, you find out that the killer, through some visual calculus or either just a note from Clausier that she'll leave you. This is the game making sure that you find it, even if you fail the visual calculus check. You find out that the gunshot that killed the mercenary came from this island that was inaccessible. So you can take a boat out to the island, and you find this bunker that the killer has probably been hiding in, but you're in rough shape, and this is where Kim suggests that you take a nap. And again, your first instinct is probably to say like, nah, man, we're real close to finding the killer. Got no time to take a nap right now, but you should, because if you take that nap, you get this scene where you go and you talk to your ex, who looks like Dolores Day, which is this kind of, I don't know, religious figure, like a godlike figure or a Jesus-like figure. I'm not totally sure. Do you know, Rick?
Yeah, the TLDR of Dolores Day is that she was a real person, but she was deified and basically became a quasi-deity.
Yeah.
The game is never clear on it. Some say that she is a war criminal. Others say that she is salvation. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things. But it's interesting to note that your ex's name, you come to find out, is Dolores.
Uh-huh.
I think. Am I misremembering that?
I am not sure, so can neither agree nor disagree.
Or it's Doris. It's either Dolores or something similar. So this dream that you're having, you're confronting your ex in the form of Dolores Day, and this is going to be something that I have to actively try not to choke up about, but it's not your actual ex that you're seeing. It's how she has materialized herself in your head based on how you feel about the situation. And I think we've all, been through that. Once we go through something as horrible as that kind of a breakup, we start to misremember how things occurred, and our memories take a shape of their own based on our emotions. And that's what you're experiencing, because there are parts where she's convivial with you and sweet, and then she says things like, like our son, I aborted him because you're a fat, poor, broke fuck. And it's like, that's not actually her. That's Harry's self-conscious putting how he feels about himself onto her, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if I explained that very well.
Yeah. Her name is Dora. I looked that up. So yeah, very, very close, Dora. So yeah, you have this conversation with her, and like so many people who would have the chance to talk to their ex who had this like horribly traumatic breakup, Harry's first instinct is to like, hey, like, can we get back together? Like, let's do this. Like, I can change. I have changed. I'm a different person. We can do this. And I think it's brilliant in here. There's a skill check to go in for a kiss. And that's one of the times when your skills are like, this is a horrible idea. Do not go in for a kiss, because it is a horrible idea, of course.
And in fact, your skills are completely against you here. All throughout the game, if you do something related to her, like try to call her on the payphone, or take out the chewing gum wrapper from your, what do you call it? The clipboard.
Yeah.
Inland Empire will be like, this is a bad idea. You don't want to go down this road.
Yep.
And up until at that point, you didn't know what it was talking about. All throughout this section, like, Dolores will say something like, I can't do this anymore. If you keep this up, you're going to die. And Inland Empire will chime in and say, we all warned you. This is everything I ever warned you about.
Yep, exactly. It's just so real in here. The way that, like, I have been in, not to this extent, but I've been in this situation trying to like rekindle a relationship that is not going to be rekindled. And even in the moment, you're like, fuck, what am I doing? Like, really? And this kind of, it shows this really well. And I mean, I just love that there's that option, that delusional option to go in for a kiss. Like, that's going to solve everything. And if you do it, you kiss her and she just kind of stands there. Of course she doesn't reciprocate, because this, well, first of all, this isn't real. This isn't happening right now. This is a dream sequence or a flashback of things that happen. But of course there's no repairing this relationship that you fucked up so badly so long ago. And when I talked earlier, like, about the emotional intelligence that this game has, like, I've never seen any piece of media handle a traumatic breakup the way this game does.
And even if you succeed in the kiss, the pros will say, you're stealing a taste. None of this belongs to you. Mm-hmm. Or she's frigid, she's tense, hiding from you. And you do it, you kiss her, and you have this thought with suggestion, because that's the check, I think. And, you say, like, but I succeeded, I passed the check.
Yeah.
And suggestion says, you should have never listened to me. You should never listen to me again.
Uh-huh.
Brother, you should put me in front of a firing squad.
Yep.
And like, it is so well realized. And I remember, see, I feel things too intensely with stuff like this, and I get choked up even thinking about it. I remember playing this for the first time, and I got through it, and I stopped. Like, I couldn't play any more of the game for the rest of that day. Like, it's rare for me to get overloaded with things like this, but this did it.
Yeah, it's rare for me.
And
go ahead.
I know. I was just gonna say it gives way to one of my favorite quotes in the game, and I was gonna see if you wanted to read it.
Oh yeah,
because I can't. I can't.
So this is, and this is like one of the quotes of the game right here. So this is my fault for not writing what leads into this quote. But she says, "This is real darkness. It's not death or war or child molestation. Real darkness has love for a face. The first death is in the heart, Harry." And I'm getting chills reading that. And then, so you see that line, the first death is in the heart. And you're like, fuck, God damn it. And then she says, "See you tomorrow." And it is brutal how real this is for traumatic breakups. And like this breakup in the game threw Harry into a destructive spiral, which is something that happens to some people, but not everybody. But all of us have had these feelings regardless of how we dealt with it. And man, it is brutal. There's no other word to describe it.
It plays into, the principal theme of the game to me is the weight of the past. Mm-hmm. And between this and the political backdrop, this is the writer is saying, like, the weight of the past, you can progress from it, but it never goes away.
Yep.
It will always be there.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no erasing this. And, see you tomorrow. How are you going to deal with this?
Those three words just have so much extra weight to them. It's incredible. Because if you're in a position where you're going to have that dream, this dream where you're talking to your ex and she's telling you how much you fucked everything up and she left because of you and it's all your fault, and it is probably mostly Harry's fault, even though this dream is kind of his distorted memory of how things happened. If you're in that state, this is not just a one-off thought that you're going to have. This is something that's dominating your life. So yeah, those three words, see you tomorrow. Brutal.
The figurines do nothing. They won't bring her back.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus. Yeah, there's that option you get a gift to give to her, and you give it to her and she's like, what am I supposed to do with this? You thought this was going to fix things? Like just a real childlike kind of idea that just immediately gets smashed as soon as you present it. Yeah. Fantastic. Whew. So let's talk about the last couple scenes, talking about how you find who the killer is. So you wake up from that dream with the ex, you go outside and you talk to the killer. And I want to know how you feel about this, because you have not met this person, and this person has never been mentioned up until now, which is deliberately breaking a rule of murder mysteries where you have known the killer the whole time, and it's always a surprise to be like, oh, that guy in Knives Out, he was the killer? Okay. Knives Out spoilers. But yeah, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this as a conclusion to the detective story?
I like it, and I am somebody that I appreciate an ending that is real. So like in The Sopranos, spoiler alert for a show that was over 20 years ago, the final scene cuts to black, and David Chase, who recently did reveal what happened, but for a long time his stance was, it doesn't matter what happens. Life is going to keep going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I appreciate. I appreciate realness. Like, yes, they could have written it in such a way that, like, it was Titus the whole time, and, like, here's how he did it. And it would have been like front page tabloid style excitement.
Yeah.
But
Kim was the killer.
But at what cost? That's not a logical conclusion to the track that these guys set up. This was, some people felt it was a letdown. Sure, okay, fine. It wasn't super exciting, but it tracked so evenly with the messaging that they were doing, that sometimes this shit happens, and, you know, as soon as you see the corpse for the first time, you can talk to it.
Yeah.
Like with your inland empire.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask him, who killed you?
And he says,
yeah, go for it. Go for it.
He says, communism killed me. And you can say that to Kim, and Kim's like, Jesus Christ. Okay, moving on.
Well, he says, love did me in, but communism pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
And you come to find out that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
This failed revolutionary who is in a self-imposed, what do you call it? Self-imposed living as a hermit, living outside of society, grew this weird, unrequited, creepy relationship with Claudia, and shot the guy just because.
Yeah, because they were having sex, and he was just like, you know what? Fuck this guy. Shoot him.
And his whole thing was, why should that mercenary, that rapist, that perpetuator of capitalism have someone and I don't?
Yeah.
So it does kind of tie into the politics. He's a straight up, like, I don't want to call him a tanky, but he is unapologetic for all of communism. So this is another way that the writers, I think, quite deftly tackle that subject. So that political discourse is weaving all throughout all of this.
Yeah. So that was my reason for why maybe this is not a satisfying conclusion as a detective story, as, like, you know, an Agatha Christie or a Knives Out or something like that. It's not satisfying in that same way, or surprising in that same way. But this killer is like the personification of the scars of the revolution that you've been hearing and seeing the effects on people the whole game. But it turns out that, like, this person is just, like, representing all of those things, and that's actually what killed this mercenary. So thematically, I think it's fantastic that this is the killer that you've been hunting for the whole time. It's not really a person who committed an evil act. It's all of these other forces just acted on this one person for, like you said, over 40 years. He's been hiding since the end of the revolution, and he's bitter that he deserted. So he's not like this, like, Japanese guy in the jungle because he didn't know the war was over. He deserted. He knows everything that's happening. He's been interacting with society a little bit. He says people just don't pay attention to me because I look like a homeless person. And he walks on the street. He steals stuff. So he's not like this. Yeah, he's not the Japanese guy in the jungle after World War II. He sees everything that's happening in the world, and he is just extremely bitter. And all of those things played into this one quick, like, you know what? Fuck this guy. Shoot him. One moment. So I dig it.
Yeah, and it's when you find him too, it's very clear that he knows that his time is up. Is that a comment on, you know, the notions of traditional communism? I don't know. That's not an argument that I'm prepared to take one stance or another against. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting that directly after we meet this person, we sort of meet another character.
Yeah. So you get the feeling that, like, during the conversation with the deserter, with the killer, who, by the way, when I said earlier, a character at the end who has a fantastic voice acting, this is A+ voice acting right here. Totally matches the kind of the tone and the emotion in the conversation.
Wait, the deserter?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant
The Phasmid?
the next. Yeah, I thought you meant the Phasmid.
The
and I
Phasmid's
was
also
like,
interesting voice acting, but the Deserter is I mean, there's so much, there's emotion, there's pain, there's declining health, all in the voice acting itself. It's fantastic. So you find out that during the conversation, you kind of get this feeling, and I think there's some skill checks you can do that basically you can kind of assess his health, and you're like, this guy's in horrible shape. And you kind of get the feeling that something has been keeping him alive, and this is the payoff from the cryptozoology side quest, which is the longest side quest in the game, not involved with a political ideology. So the payoff is you should be wearing these pheromones that the cryptozoologists offered you, because why not? Kim kind of laughs at you when you decide to get those sprayed on you. And you suddenly see this cryptid that you've heard about, the Insulindian Phasmid, come out of the reeds, and it's just looking at you, and you have an Inland Empire check to talk to it. I think it is. You can go interact with it, but to actually talk to it, you have to do an Inland Empire check. And this is another one where I can't imagine just failing that check and not getting this conversation, or not doing the cryptozoology side quest and not even seeing it out there. That would be well, I guess you wouldn't know because you wouldn't know that it's a possibility, but this conversation is very good.
yeah. So if you do this with Kuno, if Kim gets hit and sent to the hospital, you don't get to take a picture of it. But interestingly enough, Kuno is so into this thing.
Oh, hell yeah.
When you go back after this whole ordeal and wrap up with your station, like, Kuno is a changed person. He was like, this is the biggest deal ever. Like, if it weren't for Harry, like, this would have never happened. Like, this is a miracle of science. It's really sweet.
Like Kuno found Jesus because of this conversation or something like that.
Sort of. Like, when you wake up after the tribunal with Kuno, he's like not on drugs anymore, so he's a kind of a different person. But yeah, it's pretty sweet. But
cool.
This scene with Kim, you have in your notes that this is the emotional climax for you of the game, and for me, I really like what the Phasmid's saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a worthwhile message. What hit me the hardest was when it first comes out, you say, like, holy shit, like, what is that thing? And the Deserter is like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't see that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this moment where you start to spiral, and you're like, I've been spiraling all my life. Like, I've been killing myself with my addictions, and nobody is understanding me, and now I'm going literally insane.
Yeah.
I'm going literally insane. And Kim will, like, put his hand on your shoulder, and he's like, I see it.
And you're like, oh, thank God.
And it's like, I'm gonna start crying again, because it's like it's such a beautiful scene.
Yeah. And it sounds silly if we were to describe it. I mean, it's a giant stick insect that you're looking at, but it brings on this beautiful climax here. And so I think you should save scum this and make sure you pass this check. And so you talk to the Phasmid, and I don't know, I kind of got the feeling I would be talking to this, like, superior being that knew everything, but it's not. It's just a giant insect, and it's curious about humans the same way that you're curious about it. And so, like, it's actually talking to you the way that insects would view humans. Like, humans are an invading force, and all of the animals agree that humans are going to be the reason that the world is destroyed one day, which real world parallels, and that humans are the reason that the Pale is here. And, well, at least they say nobody remembers the Pale before humans came. And as for the causation of that, I'm not sure, but you learn more about the Pale throughout the church side quest that we should have talked about. Maybe we still can, but anyway, the point of the Phasmid, I think, is like, this is this thing that's totally on the outside from all of the human affairs that you have been struggling with through the whole game. It's totally on the outside. And it's basically saying, like, you are a wonderful creature to me because, like, you know, you can continue and you can do all of these wonderful things. And me and the insects, like he says, like, oh, the things that bring me joy, like when I find some sugar or some, you know, some nectar or something like that, that's what makes me happy. But you are a complex creature and you are incredible. And it's this very strange, like, emotional uplift after you've had this horrible conversation with the deserter about all of the tragedy in his life, and after you've had that just absolutely brutal conversation with your ex. This is an uplifting conversation to kind of close the game out.
It's something, you know, the Phasmid does say that, like, that the humans basically brought the Pale because the birds, the trees, they don't remember it before you. And that, you know, given enough time, you would wipe us all out simply by accident. Mm-hmm. So it does paint this kind of bleak picture of humanity, which I think they handled with tact. You know, I'm thinking about, like, the guys from South Park handling this, where they'd be like, well, both sides are bad and everybody's evil. And it's like, that's a very childish way of looking at it. I think what makes this beautiful is the studio went with that message that, yes, humanity is creating the Pale, which can be seen as a multitude of different things, but I think climate change is the global warming is the most accepted one. Mm-hmm. And that, yes, humans are going to wipe this out given an infinite timeline simply by accident. But things continue to move forward.
Yeah.
That's why it's so powerful within the context of that last dream, because, like, see you tomorrow, it's going to keep coming, but things will still move forward.
And the Phasmid gives you some encouragement and says, like, hey, carry on with your life. Keep doing your best. Leave the woman in the past. And Harry can actually just say, like, what woman? There's a lot of good options during this scene, but it's basically, I don't know, it's just this very emotional, like, note of encouragement in a game that doesn't have a whole lot of encouragement throughout it. Like, carry on, do your best, and then the famous quote from the game, do it for the working class. It's just it's maybe it's not the most powerful, it's not the thing that I'm going to remember the most, but it's a very, very strange but somehow fitting way to kind of basically finish the game.
Yeah, and the game is at its end. We learn by proxy that the pheromones that the Phasmid was emitting was actually keeping the deserter alive. And now that the Phasmid has scurried, which, by the way, you can find, like, Clash's original passport, the last piece of the armor, if you're caring about that.
Yeah.
After the Phasmid scurries away, the deserter's health basically just plummets, and he is essentially comatose.
Yeah.
Like, he's done.
Instantly. Yeah, as soon as the Phasmid goes away, it's like, okay, everything that had been propping this guy up is gone now. So, yeah. It's a very... How do you feel about this, like, kind of supernatural turn that this took? Because it's real. Like we said, Kim can see this too. This thing is real. It was just disguising itself from the deserter, which is why he couldn't see it. So it's kind of a supernatural turn right at the end in a way that doesn't matter really for how the game world works, you know?
Yeah. I don't know that I'd call it a turn, because, like, the Pale and Phasmid aspect of the game have been a very slow burn. Mm-hmm. And it's something we didn't, like, get super in depth with the Pale, but it plays into a lot of why the world is as it is. I wouldn't, if it were absent the Phasmid encounter, I wouldn't feel differently about the ending. I would still think it's good. Mm-hmm. I'm happy that it's there because I think its message is just and good. But if it weren't there, fine, it'd be the same. You just, you know, have to detain the deserter, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm imagining a scenario where you get the same message delivered by a person. Like, maybe you go back and the rest of your team gives you this encouraging message, or Kim gives it to you, or something like that, or Kuno gives it to you. I think the way that the Phasmid is so separated from humanity, like an outsider looking in telling you these things, makes it a bit more special than it would be if Kim was the one giving you this speech. So I like it. And, you know, if you pay attention to things as the game progresses, you should notice, hey, like I'm doing a lot of quests about this phasmid. There's got to be a payoff here, right? So it does make sense that this is actually where one of the emotional climaxes is, I think. And I like it a lot.
So you've asked me a couple of questions as we've been going through here. So now I have one for you. So we're wrapping up here. You go back to the mainland, and this is where you kind of reconvene with your partner, as well as Judith, as well as the one guy that studies pale effects on the brain. I can't remember pale effects on the brain. I can't remember his name. But basically, you're reconvening with everybody. And I was listening today to my far and away one of my favorite reviewers, Noah Caldwell-Gervais.
Yeah,
and he mentioned reading an article on Vice where somebody gave the critique at the end of the game that they felt that the game's message sort of shrank or flinched insofar as, you know, the political ideologies of rebuilding communism give way to making a better police force, kind of, maybe, and things like that. So I was curious to see how you felt about the ending and if you felt like it was... if it accomplished what it set out to do, if it answered the question that it asked as a whole, or if you feel the same way as the Vice article, that it didn't fully answer the question, or that it kind of flinched, or, you know, was otherwise unsatisfying.
I disagree with the idea that this game is about rebuilding communism, like, flat out.
Oh, no.
Like that.
I'm sorry.
That was like a central theme of the game.
I didn't ask the question in an effective way. That was my fault. But the political ideologies are there. They're scathing, and they kind of shrink and flinch into the police force will maybe be better.
Yeah.
You're going. So do you think it was an effective ending?
Yeah, like what I was getting at is that, like, the political ideologies are there and they're commented on, but at the end of the day, this is not a game about political ideologies. I think this is a very personal game that for a lot of people is a game about redemption for your character and kind of turning your life around, or at least living with the trauma that has caused this spiral. So, like, I like that the political ideologies are there throughout the game, but at the end of the day, the political ideologies play into what the characters are doing and stuff like that, but I don't think this is a game about political ideologies. And so in that conversation at the end, the conversation is all about Harry and how the case progressed. And that's what this is. And I also don't really think this is like trying to say we're going to build a better police force. I think it's just like saying Harry is going to be better and Kim is going to come join. And so, like, yeah, the police force will be better because Kim's there. But, like, at the end of the game, you get this kind of thing. It's like you accomplished your task. You redeemed Harry a little bit, and you set Harry on this new path of kind of recovery and living a more normal life. The case is over, and his life moves on, and in the grand scheme of things, Harry's not going to rebuild communism by himself, and Harry's not even going to make an appreciable change in what's going on in Revachol where the game is set. He's just a police officer solving this case. And, like, I think that what the game is actually going for is this very personal story of Harry, not being a game that's like, the point of this game is to make political commentary. I think that's thrown in as flavor, not the main thing. So I do like the ending because I thought that the game is about Harry and his redemption. In my game, at least, it's about bringing Harry back into society and being a functioning member. And I think that the ending is really good because you have this breakdown of how everything went, and Kim is defending you when your officers come at you. And yeah, it's a very good little wrap up. By this point, the climaxes, those are done. This is just a kind of clean up. We need a way to finish the story on a satisfying ending here. So yeah, that's my thing.
No, I'm right there with you. I think it's a more of a personal story. I would argue that the political commentary is more than flavor, but even still, I think perspective is the key, and the game has not been shy or elusive about that at all. In terms of personal stuff, I mean, that's self-explanatory from what we've talked about today. Mm-hmm. The entire dream sequence does a great job of explaining that, but even the political aspect is the perspective that they have is that it's more complicated and nuanced to say that, like, now that I have that university degree in truth of political know-how and better than you-ness, I can now change things for the better, because that's just not how scale works. Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
it's more nuanced and complicated than that. I don't see any other way this could have ended. I really don't.
Yeah. It's a very satisfying and natural way for this to end, because your partners from the police force have been in the city since like day 2 or day 3. They've been there the whole time. You don't remember who they are because Harry doesn't remember anything. And they are staying back because in Harry's bender, he basically told them all to fuck off and to leave him alone. And so it's only at the end that they reveal themselves and that you're like able to have this conversation. And yeah, so I mean, I like the ending, but to me, this isn't really the ending. This is just the conclusion. This is wrapping it up in a nice way.
Yeah, conclusion rather than ending. I think that's a terrific way of looking at it.
Yeah. So that is the end of Disco Elysium, and you should try to convince Kim to come join you on the force, because I like to imagine Harry and Kim having a good police partnership for years to come. And you get in the car and it drives away and it plays this beautiful song that I'm going to cut into the episode here so everyone can hear it one more time. And yeah, that is the end of Disco Elysium. I can only think of a few things that I really like that I didn't mention. I like the side plot with the church and with Egghead and the party guys. There's not a whole lot like, I left it out because it's not a super emotional thing. It's just very cool, except for that part where you dance with Kim. That was a very good payoff. I like the idea of a hole in the ceiling that is like, a portal to nothingness, or the Pale, basically. That's a cool sci-fi idea that's causing all these anomalies, and that was cool to figure out. But I think we covered most of the stuff that I really wanted to talk about here, and we've left out so much. There's so much good stuff in this game. We left out the guy who's so rich that light reflects off of him, or refracts off of him.
Absolutely blew my mind the first time I saw that guy.
It's such a hilarious concept. Like, this guy is so fucking rich that even light can't touch him.
I think you can talk him into giving you $1,000 if you pass a few checks.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite things throughout the game, where you need money. And so, like, other games would never allow you to do this, but your character is such a blank slate, almost childlike, where he's like, hey, you look like you have nice clothes. Can I have some money? And you can ask this to like everyone in the game. Just, hey, can I have some money?
Yeah, it's a donation to the police force.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
And I never got the sense that, like, Harry doesn't feel like those are bribes. Harry is childlike in, like, hey, you have this thing that I don't have. Can I have some of that thing? So, yeah, anything else you wanted to briefly mention before we say goodbye?
I don't know, man. I think we covered a lot of really good stuff here. This was an absolute joy to be a part of. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was such a productive and enriching conversation.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, it was a good time, and this is going to be by far the longest episode of Tales from the Backlog to date, but I can't think of a better game to do it with than Disco Elysium. So thanks for doing it with me.
Yeah, I hope we didn't go too long.
It's a podcast. If people don't want to listen to 3 hours and 50 minutes or however long this is, they don't have to. They have the power. So anyway, we're going to call it quits then. And one more time, for anyone listening, if you've made it this far, if you've listened through the spoiler section, I hope that we did this game justice, because this game fucking rules. It's one of the best games ever made. And like we said earlier, basically required gaming for anyone who values storytelling and writing and character work in games, and is not averse to reading, which, again, give us gamers some credit. We can enjoy a game with lots of reading. So, thanks for listening. One more time, to support Tales from the Backlog, please give a rating and review and tell people about it. Talk with me on social media. Those links are in the episode description. I will also put links to Pixel Project Radio, which is definitely worth your time as well. Please, please, please check out Pixel Project Radio. Fantastic. So, Rick, thanks for joining again, and we will see you next time.